but this happens all the time.
How many times would you say you've been stopped?
Probably in my lifetime I've been stopped 1 to 3. I mean, the memorable ones are probably 6 times. But it's definitely in the 20s and 30s. I mean, probably since 1994, 20s and 30s. The worst one was after Super Tuesday in Orange County. I was campaigning for Super Tuesday and for Obama. And after it was over, a friend of mine, Journey Smollett, who's an actress on True Blood, she and I were done campaigning. We decided to see a movie. After the movie, we went to Borders to get, I wanted to get a housewarming gift for my manager. And we pulled over. I pulled over to take a phone call for my manager because, I thought being a law-abiding citizen, you're not supposed to drive and talk. So I pulled over, talked, finished the conversation, pulled off. 5 cars stopped us, and pretty much that was the most humiliating experience because we had to get out the car. They made us spread on, the car. They searched the car. We sat in the back of the not their paddy wagon.
The Cruiser.
Yeah, their car. And the whole time I was thinking, God, please don't look in the trunk. First of all, I felt like a criminal already. Okay, I got stuff in the trunk. But the stuff I had in the trunk were psychology books and some Scrabble games. And in my head, I was like, there's no way that they're going to believe that stuff belongs to me. There's no way that they're going to. And so the whole time, I was just like, God, please don't. Please don't. She was trying to get her her camera phone. She's like, this is unconstitutional. They're not. This is a legal search. They're supposed to have a protocol for So that I've been. This is the night before the Grammys. The night before the Grammys in 2010 when I won. So it's this happens all the time.
So all these examples you've given of being stopped, whether at the airport or in a car by cops. Can you explain, because we hear legally, now it's been ruled unconstitutional, stop and frisk in New York, but what it does to you?
It is absolutely probably the most humiliating, lowest feeling a human being can have. Twice this happened in front of dates. And all I kept thinking about was nothing's more emasculating than to be emasculated in front of a girl that you like. There's just no coming back from that. And it's sort of an unspoken thing. I always felt even afterwards, there's this unspoken cloud of the question of my manhood. Because, that's why I'm often shocked when I see footage of people and they talk back to cops. I want to do that, but it's even watching Fruitvale, I was like, no, don't, just get on your knees, just don't, you can die. And it's the most humiliating, emasculating feeling I've ever had. I only feel low when that happens, even if it's playful. In Philly, whenever we finish a Roots album, I give it the car test. So even driving up and down Broad Street in Philadelphia, I once got stopped 3 times. And, the first 2 times they were just they looked, they're just oh, it's you. They let me go. 3rd time, it was oh, man, it's you. And then I felt safe enough to sort of have casual banter with him. I was like, this is the 3rd time I've been stopped. What's going on here? And he was like, well, you're kind of in Temple University's neighborhood. And I was like, yeah, and? He's like, well, look at the car you're in. I drive a Scion. And my logic for getting a Scion was don't get a flashy car. I come from the 80s. So in the 80s, when you saw someone in a BMW and a Mercedes, they automatically got pulled over because they were a drug dealer. So I thought, okay, I'll get a Scion. Well, first of all, it was free. It was given to me. And it was boxy. It was Afro-friendly. It didn't smush my Afro down. And so it's a comfortable car. I like it. He said, in this, you kind of look like you stole it from a college student. And I was like, oh, well, okay, I get it. So in even choosing the car in my mind that would sort of not put me in that position, I actually wound up putting me in that position by driving that car. Because he said if you were in an SUV, we would just thought you wanted Philadelphia Eagles or something. Like, oh, okay, that's the car you belong in.
If your initial investment is $500 million and your apartments are up in March, you should have X amount of dollars rolling in by the end of this year.
Ah, X amount. That's very good, isn't it?
Not only that, you can depreciate the entire building for the full amount.
Depreciate. Very good. I like that.
And we found a way to get around this fair housing crap.
Ah, good. Getting around the crap. That's good.
By keeping the rents high, we're going to appeal to a select class of people.
Select class. Very, very good.
We'll keep the eggplants out.
Ah, good. We don't want any vegetables.
No, the jungle bunnies.
Oh, of course. They'll eat the vegetables.
Boss, can I talk to him? We're going to keep out the niggers.
The what?
The niggers, we'll keep them out.
Yes.
Sir? You are talking to a nigger!
Context of White Supremacy. Justice, Gus T. Renegade, in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Thursday, August 15th, 2013, so I have been told. We will be back for the remainder of the week, white people permitting. The book study session tomorrow, 4th installment, The Warmth of Other Suns, Isabel Wilkerson. The last 2 weeks, thoroughly enjoying and quite informative in my view. Hopefully that will continue. And we have really not got that far into the book. It's so large, I think we've still only done about a quarter of the book. So if you have not been tuning in, I would encourage it. You can see a lot of familiar behavior patterns with regards to the way that Black people have been responding, pitifully in most instances, but responding nonetheless to the system of racism, white supremacy. That'll be tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. The compensatory call-in is Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, and Sunday, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing back again. Sunday evening, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, full week, Context of White Supremacy. The audio clip that we began with, victim of racism, Questlove, I read his essay in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's killer a few weeks ago. I think a lot of people saw it, kicked up a lot of attention. Even a suspected racist female took to write a rebuttal and point out how she thought Questlove was wrong in his assessment. He was on Democracy Now! With Gus's favorite white woman, Amy Goodman. He was a guest on yesterday. He was actually on for pretty much the whole program, and most of it, what you heard, they were talking about racism. He gave some more of his thoughts on what happened with Trayvon Martin and just being a Black male. He shared a lot of incidents of him being stopped by enforcement officers. You heard quite a bit in the clip just there, his view about how humiliating and emasculating the whole experience is. Pretty interesting stuff. You can check it out on Democracy Now! They also talked about the role of Don Cornelius and Soul Train. Cowbell would be ringing there. It's a very interesting interview. Anywho, the piece at the end from the 1979 film The Jerk by Steve Martin. I will allow our guest to explain the relevance of that since she kicks off her book with that. Our guest for today's program, one of the few times that Gus actually met the guest in person before they came on the program. That doesn't happen too often, but it did in this case. We met at the 2010 White Privilege Conference, courtesy of Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. That would be another cowbell, where I had seen her repeatedly throughout the week in passing. There's so many people at the conference and so many different workshops. I've said before, it's kind of like 60 different conferences because what your experiences will depend on which workshops you attend and who you saw. So 10 different people could go and all get a very different experience. At any rate, I had seen her many times throughout the week, and the final day, I think that Saturday, I was actually at her workshop. I don't even think I knew that she was doing a workshop I had planned to attend at the end of the week, talking about the creation of the white race, how that happened, what it means to be a white person. It was one of the best workshops that I attended. It was one of the, really, it was tops with regards to being honest about racism, white supremacy. Most of the workshops that I attended did not have that level of honesty and just, useful information. I spoke with her after the workshop, and she agreed to be a guest on the program. She visited with us way back in 2010 to discuss that particular workshop, a lot of the information there, as well as I thought it was great. She talked about how under the system of white supremacy, white people memorialize their acts of terrorism against non-white people. She gave tons of examples with regards to the Texas Rangers now being a baseball team, super popular, and they have a long history of brutalizing, massacring non-white people. The Washington Redskins, lots of different examples. I would even say Andrew Jackson should qualify with him being on the $20 bill. At any rate, it also, I have to bring up at the conclusion of the workshop, this was a highlight moment. Conclusion of the workshop, great information. I think at this point I'd already asked to see if we could get her as a guest on the program back in 2010. And she agreed, and she was about to leave, and she asked for a hug. And I said, well, didn't you just say that you were racist? And she said, well, yeah, that's true. And so we had an amicable handshake, and she departed. Within, I think, 20 minutes, the founder of the White Privilege Conference, Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., he came and chastised me and said, did this white woman, did she request a hug and you refused her? And I just remember being so stunned, like, wow, I cannot believe that this got back to the director so quick, and I'm being fussed at for declining a hug. And I thought in the whole history of racism, white supremacy, only at the White Privilege Conference can a black male be chastised for not hugging a white woman. Classic moment, which actually we discussed on her first visit to the cows. You can hit the archives, May 2010. She authored a book since then, her book, The Birth of a White Nation, The Invention of White People and Its Relevance Today. She lived she was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, lived in Belgium for 6 years before her family relocated to Victoria, Texas. She says it was this experience, attending school, living in Texas, that informed her understanding of racism in America. She is currently a lawyer and professor of sociology and criminal justice at St. Xavier University. She is also a former Chicago police officer and holds a Ph.D. from Northwestern University. Pleasure to have her back on the program. Joining us for the second time, Professor Jacqueline Battalora. Let me see if I can locate her line here. Let's see, Professor Battalora, is this you?
It's me. Nice to be back with you.
Outstanding. Glad to have you back with us. Hopefully, listeners, if you did not hear her first visit on the program, pay attention. Should be interesting. Thank you for sharing a bit of your Thursday evening. For folks who this might be their first time hearing from you, any background information you think that they should know about you and the work that you do?
I'm a white woman in the United States of America, and I was clueless to that fact for much of my life, and I had glimpses that there was something about whiteness probably in high school, and I pursued undergraduate and then graduate studies, and in sort of reflecting back on those studies, I can see that much of my educational pursuit has been to understand that experience. And now I know that it is the experience of whiteness. And so that's what where I have chosen to focus my research and anti-racist work since graduating from Northwestern.
Right on. Before we get to the book, I guess a couple things. Number one, at the White Privilege Conference, and you can correct me if my memory is bad or failing me. At the White Privilege Conference, you, in your workshop, said that you had a child with a black male. Is that accurate?
No, I dated a black male in high school in Victoria, Texas, okay. And it was through that relationship, and I had the very tangible experience of experiencing myself as a white person who then started to lose her whiteness, but of course I was still the same skin color. And so it was actually in that relationship and through that experience that I realized white isn't biological, that there's something else going on.
Okay, appreciate the correction. No child, but you did have, are we saying this is sexual relationship with a black male?
This is an intimate relationship for 3 years, high school and a year beyond. And we're still the best of friends, my good friend Ricky Brigham.
Okay. I don't use the term whiteness. I feel like it's not the most accurate term. I know it's very popular and lots of folks use that term. I don't use it because I feel like we're not really being truthful about what's going on here. I feel like the term whiteness tends to be synonymous with racism, white supremacy, particularly the way that it's used. If you don't think that's the case, that's fine. You can extrapolate on all that as we go. But you said that in this experience, you say having an intimate relationship with a black male, that you experienced losing your whiteness. What does that mean exactly?
Well, because I began to be treated differently by white people, and so I began to, I couldn't have put it in these words at that time, but I knew something was happening, and now I would articulate it as that white was not just having light skin, but it was compliance with rules, largely set by white men. And that when you don't follow the rules, which for a white girl is to date white men only, you start to lose some of the regular unearned advantages that white people get.
Did you get mistreated? Did you get harmed? Did you lose resources?
Oh, sure. I had friends whose parents told them, not to hang out with me. I had a sibling who was engaged, whose future mother-in-law, reprimanded her because of me. There were numerous situations that weren't pleasant.
Okay. To me, and I'm just about being accurate here, I have said consistently, I think white people, they cannot be ignorant about racism, white supremacy. If so, they will get in trouble with other white people if they violate the codes and statutes that a white person is supposed to abide by under racism, white supremacy. To me, that does not sound like you lost your spot on the white team. Sounds like you're still a white woman getting all the goodies that go along with being a white person, and I suspect practicing racism, white supremacy consciously and or unconsciously. It sounds like you just got some other white people, probably racist. It sounds like you just got them upset. Maybe they said something to you to let you know that they did not approve of your conduct, and or told some of your other white friends, white family members, white associates that they did not approve of your conduct and that maybe they should distance themselves from you. Is that accurate, or am I not understanding?
Well, you know what? I just think we have to, this issue of race is incredibly complex, and you'll notice in my book I don't even use the word racist, and I don't use it because I don't find it very helpful, and I find it helpful for my students, understandably so, who are really angry at having to be confronted with white supremacy every day. And for those students, it's part of a healing process, which is completely understandable.
I don't think you find... Oh, okay, go ahead.
I find it helpful to talk about... I define whiteness in the book, and I reference not only those who are labeled white, but it is meant to capture not only that group, but the social structural advantages that are today and historically have been conferred to that group of people. So it's meant to capture both the systemic white supremacy built into our systems of thinking, our physical systems, structures, our penal system, our law enforcement, law period, educational system, the structure of our cities and suburbs and neighborhoods, etc. Now, to get back to your comment, I think that there are so many elements of unearned white advantage, and I guess I would say that in those experience that I had as a kid or as a young person dating an African American man, I was, in terms of everyday white advantages, I got most of them. Certainly when I went to pay for something at the store, I wasn't asked to produce my ID like the black or brown person next to me. I wasn't pulled over by law enforcement unless I went into a black neighborhood, right? Then I was there to buy drugs, of course. That's the assumption. So in those cases, white people do get pulled over. And so I was excluded from some of the advantages of whiteness in that certain conversations that I would have been assumed, for instance, the racist joke. I was fortunate to not be included in that when people knew that I dated Rick. That's fine, but it's one of those ways in which white folks who date non-white people begin to experience whiteness as something that's not biologically bound, that's much more ambiguous, much more rule-based than biology.
I agree completely when we are talking about racism, white supremacy, and specifically with the white race. We are not talking about biology. I think that is extremely important. Totally agree with that point. I do think that's something that causes a lot of confusion, particularly for victims of racism, non-white people, in understanding that white people choose whom is a white person, whom is not a white person, and that the criterion for making that decision changes. You touch on that in the book, how it's very fluid and undefined, which is to their advantage because white people just get to decide who's going to be white and who is not white. But going back to the question, I just don't agree. I think this would be a major point of contention in your book. And I would ask listeners to just think. I've said consistently, think of racism, white supremacy as a crime. Many times when talking to individuals, they talk about how complex and complicated racism, white supremacy is. One of the ways to get a better understanding, think of it as a crime. Because it is. Think of it as any other crime. If we were talking about robbery, rape, terrorism, any other crime, do you remove the label of the perpetrator? When you talk about other crimes, when you hear people talk about other crimes, if they're talking about arson, do they remove the label and say, well, we're going to talk about arson, but we are not going to label anyone specifically an arsonist?
Well,
hang on. We're going to talk about rape, but we're not going to label anyone as a rapist. We're going to talk about terrorism, but we're not going to label anyone as a terrorist. I contend, and this is a pattern consistently with racism, white supremacy. This is the only crime against individuals, and this is the biggest crime on the planet, in my opinion. This is the only crime where consistently there is an effort to remove that label and say, well, we're not going to use racist, not going to use that term, not going to use white supremacist. You said, I don't think it's constructive. I might be paraphrasing, but I don't think it's constructive to use that term. And I could not disagree more strongly. I think it is extremely important. That is one of the principal problems in not being able to accurately identify what it means
I would disagree that I don't accurately identify, but I am going to
ask that you not interrupt. Hang on, because I am letting you talk without interrupting, and I want the same courtesy. Okay. Now, as I said, I think that is extremely important. You said you don't even use the term racist in your book. You use the term whiteness, and I already said that in my view, this is a pattern that I've seen with some of the people that you mentioned who've also been guests on our program, Dr. Peggy McIntosh, Noel Ignatieff, many of the folks at the White Privilege Conference in using the term whiteness, and I've said consistently, and some of our other guests have also said, it's not the most accurate term. We're really moving away from what we're talking about with regards to white people practicing racism white supremacy. If we're getting down to behaviors, if this is not about biology, this is about doing. And we have to be honest about that. In my opinion, I could be incorrect. If you want to go ahead and respond, go ahead.
I am in complete agreement with proper labeling, and I believe the best label is white supremacy. And I use it consistently throughout the book. And I end the book reminding people that white privilege is something in academia we're all happy to use as the reference point. But the truth of the matter is, but for institutionalized white supremacy, white privilege doesn't exist. So the truth is to talk about white supremacy. And so that's the route that I have found most helpful and most useful. And I don't think it skirts around the problem, because I argue in the book that the root of the problem is white supremacy. And the fact that we don't even see it anymore because it's absolutely normalized in every darn corner of the social systems that make up this country.
Okay. We're going to go through the book, read some passages, so we'll get an opportunity to hear what you've written. You start the book referencing the 1979 film. I had a little sound clip at the beginning, Steve Martin's The Jerk. Very interesting film. It starts off with, I guess, a black family dancing, singing about cotton, and you have Steve Martin, who's a white person for people who don't know. Steve Martin, a longtime comedian, actor, in the middle of this family. And he says that, I mean, it's the craziest film in the world. You have to watch this. Why did you start with this film? What relevance does this have to your book, The Birth of a White Nation?
Well, because I thought about the film since I was a young person in the 80s, so that's when that film came out. And I thought about just the laughter in the theater when he says I was born a young black child. Because the laughter only works if you see this guy and see whiteness. It just, for me, seemed to capture that the assumption that most of us have in this country that these race labels are somehow rooted to biology. And so that's why I started with it, because I wanted to first name the fact that most of us presume that these race categories that we click off in government forms and educational forms and medical forms, that they have some truth in genetics or biology, and then to show through historical information that doesn't hold any water.
This, I would say, it is comparable to many of the blackface films where you have a white person who somehow becomes a black person. If you want to think Soul Man with Ray Don Chong,
yes.
Even Curious Case of Benjamin Buttons, I was thinking that is almost identical to this film, Steve Martin, The Jerk, if you want a more current example. Where I guess a white family, they leave this white child on the doorstep of a black family and they just take care of him and raise him as their own. It seems to be a lot of these types of films throughout the system of racism, white supremacy, almost as though there is an affinity for some sort of imagination that a white person could be either a black person and or in a black family and or both. Can you comment on that? Because there does seem to be quite a few of these types of films.
Well, I mean, I'm not a film specialist by any means, but I think I could just tell you, which maybe is not an answer that you're looking for, but I would highly recommend the work of Eric Lott. He's done this incredible historical research on blackface performance, and it's one of the smartest pieces I have ever come upon. He doesn't really get into the more contemporary films. It's more 19th century pieces, but he captures the layers and the complexity of the imagination that is contorted and manipulated by white supremacy and these the imposition of white people's ideas upon the black body Anyway, it's brilliant. I could never respond remotely adequately, but I would refer your listeners to Eric Lott's work.
Okay. Your book, Birth of a White Nation, The Invention of White People and Its Relevance Today, the acknowledgments, this is on page, actually before the book starts, so in the acknowledgments section. When I first identified myself in a self-conscious way as white, I was about 13 years old and living in southern Texas. I had moments where I experienced my whiteness as something contingent upon behavior. I came to realize that a white racial status was something that could be changed and perhaps even lost. Can you elaborate on this paragraph and especially this last sentence? I came to realize that a white racial status was something that could be changed and perhaps even lost.
Sure. We've already talked about this because I referenced the treatment that I had received dating an African American man at that time period in that location of this country, and so it was really in looking back and trying to make sense of that experience that I saw whiteness having this sort of degree of flexibility.
You say white as a racial status as something that could be changed and perhaps even lost. Did at any point you lose your classification as a white person?
I did to certain white people. Actually, to quite a few, actually. I did. But in terms of what I clicked off on forms, that did not change.
Yeah, see, as a victim of racism...
I wish I could... Go ahead. I was just going to add that I was actually... There was a term used in reference to me, and it just escaped me. And it was a term that was meant to capture that I'm was a white person, but who has lost her claim to whiteness. If I remember it, it was used to refer to me a number of times during that time period.
Okay, that's one I don't agree. I feel like that's not being honest. If you say you're still filling out forms and as I said earlier, some white people, in my view, that's some white people, they're upset with you. They do not agree with what you're doing. They feel like you're breaking the code of racism, white supremacy. But that's one of those things. As soon as you are no longer dating Rick, this black male, life is grand. No problems. You're still on the white team, getting all the benefits. And as I said before, and primarily practicing racism, white supremacy. That would have to be my suspicion, but I don't think that's accurate for any white person to say that they have lost their white status just as a result of quote unquote dating a black person.
I didn't mean to say that I lost my whiteness. That would be ridiculous. I received all sorts of privileges even while dating Rick to those who didn't know about our relationship, and so I think that's a misconstruction of what I'm saying. What I was trying, the idea, Gus, that I was trying to capture there was that could whiteness be lost? Yes, it could, because it's a frickin' construction. and is it something that in my lifetime will be lost? Absolutely not. In my daughter's lifetime, unlikely. But can it be lost? Absolutely, because it's a frickin' invention. It's power being imposed. That's what I was trying to capture.
I will hope that listeners can use their common sense and see if it makes sense. I've already given my view on it several times, so I'm not going to repeat myself. And I think a lot of this, for the crux of me, it comes down to, at the end of the day, if being white means practicing racism, white supremacy, as you said, it's not biological. You say in your book, white culture is about practicing racism, white supremacy. Everything about the system that white people have set up is about encouraging, promoting, supporting white people to terrorize and abuse non-white people and to get all the goodies and benefits that go with that. If that is the case, have you seen any evidence that white people are going to voluntarily stop practicing racism?
Well, I would modify some of what you said before that to, I mean, look, you have varying degrees of power that are practiced by different groups of white people. And do all white people participate in, actually, and I'll throw this one out at you right now, I would argue that every single person who is remotely a success, and I'm making little quotation marks in the air in this country, is actually required to participate in, to some degree, in promoting white supremacy just to be a success.
I would appreciate if I can just get an answer to the question, have you seen any evidence that white people are going to voluntarily stop practicing racism? If you could give me a yes or no, then you can, give whatever you want, but that really gets down to the crux of it, about my thoughts on the book and everything that's been said thus far.
Well, I would say that I see white people all the time who are willing to dive in and who are struggling to confront their own participation in white supremacy. And part of why giving, I find these yes or no questions for a response that journalists often want too simplistic and too black and white, if you will, that don't capture the reality of the world that we live in.
Again, I want listeners to use your common sense. Go ahead, but I want listeners to use your common sense when you're hearing these responses. Go ahead.
That's my response.
Wowee. I don't think I got an answer to the question at all. To me...
Well, maybe I didn't understand your question, Gus.
You want me to say it again?
Please.
Okay. Have you seen any evidence that white people are going to voluntarily stop practicing racism?
My general answer is white. Which white people? All white people? Definitely no. There is no evidence that this group of humanity called white people are taking action to stop that. What I can say is that there are small pockets, and they are far too small and too infrequent, who are actively trying to confront their own participation in white supremacy and trying to do something positive about that, which means trying to stop participation in racist actions.
Are you in this small pocket of white people?
I hope that I am.
What exactly are you doing to stop the practice of racism, white supremacy, even on an individual level?
Well, that's the most significant level, because it's the one we actually have some control over. I try in lots of ways. I have made it the focus of my research. I journal to keep myself aware of whiteness. I do my best to be as well-read as possible on the institutions and structures that are reinforcing and participating in white supremacy. I purposefully chose to live where my community is racially very diverse, where my daughter goes to school. When we're making choices at my daughter's public school, I'm trying to make sure I keep at the forefront the power of white supremacy that is impacting parents, the good white liberal parent choices, and trying to raise to the surface. When you're choosing the AP classes over supporting these other areas of the school, who are you really advancing? Just in those, living life every day is an opportunity to confront white supremacy.
As a victim of racism, I think it would be extremely easy for a white person to do all of those things that you just mentioned and still remain dedicated, steadfast, and unwavering to the system of racism white supremacy. Nothing about that really leaps out at me as, oh, wow, she's really going above and beyond. As Farrah Winfrey said when she was a guest on our program, admitted white supremacists, the most I can do is the least I can do. And that did not sound like the most a white person could do. And you said you do keep a journal. Do you write instances where you say, hey, I failed, I practiced racism?
Oh, my God, I failed.
Hang on, because I'll have specifically where you practiced racism, white supremacy. You mistreated someone because they were not white. You somehow participated, practiced racism, white supremacy. And if you can list some of those failures.
I'm sorry, Gus. I keep thinking you're done. I'm sorry.
Oh, I am done.
Are you done?
Yes, I am done.
I miss the mark every day, all the time, and I do it in lots of ways. I practice. I participate in miscegenation, assumptions about different racial groups, about religions, about gender, about sexuality. I miss the mark in lots of ways. But with regard to that wonderful, beautiful quote, the most I can do is the least I can do, that's beautiful, but I only have each day to live, and each day, in every moment, you have one choice. And I think it's so important. I'm a white person. I began this stating that, which means I learned all of the institutionalized and have been conferred all of the privileges and advantages that come with that in this country. And I own that. When
we last saw each other in person at the White Privilege Conference, and I said, didn't you just say that you were a racist? And you said yes. Is that still true? You, a white person, that you are a racist?
Yes, it is absolutely true. I don't believe you can be a product of this culture and society and not be racially prejudiced. Impossible.
All right. I at least appreciate that. I will get a few quotes from the book here to see if you can share with our listeners. And then I'll see if Justice has some questions. For folks that are listening in, the number to dial is 760-569-7676. And the code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you have questions. The number again, 760-569-7676. And the code is 564-943#. Did I mishear when you first were giving your list of ways that you participate in practice racism? You said you participate in miscegenation. Did I hear you correctly?
I don't think so.
Did you say the word miscegenation?
I meant to say misogyny. If it came out miscegenation, I apologize.
Right on. I think she said miscegenation. Listeners can check. I do make errors, but I think she said miscegenation. That might.
I may have. I meant misogyny, and apologize for the misspeech.
Right on. Glad we got clarification. Folks can let me know if I didn't hear correctly, but I think she did say miscegenation. Okay. You start your book off, I think, actually, before I even get to that, who is your intended audience with this book?
Well, I was writing it for a class that I teach, a first-year seminar course.
At St. Xavier University?
That is correct.
Okay. What's the racial makeup of your class, like white, non-white?
Well, it changes all the time, but actually we have the second highest diverse student population in the Chicagoland area. My classes typically have about 40-45% white, and actually I'd say 55. Yeah, I think that's about right. 55 non-white, and I would include in the non-white, even though technically they click off white, are Muslim students, because they are not conferred the everyday advantages of whiteness by any means.
I know you said it rotates, depending on what group you have in, but I guess on average, when you're doing this class, how many students that are black or that you think are black, what percentage are black students?
Well, let me just look at my, about 15%.
Okay. Very interesting. Okay. So the book intended for your class, that is interesting to know, which is 40 to 45% white, 55% non-white, 5% black. You start off talking about the beginnings in the United States and before you had a firm race identified as white prior to individuals even being labeled as white. And we talked about this before when you were on the program in 2010 and in your workshop that originally, we're talking 1600s, that you had a small number of black people. I think that is a hugely important point. Very few black people. In fact, you list in your book as of 1650, there were only 500 persons of African descent. I could not highlight that enough times, but in this time period, you really didn't have a quote-unquote white race. That term wasn't being used. And you think that is an important starting point for understanding racism, white supremacy, and white people because...
Well, I was actually interested in the point where the reference to white people began. And when I started there, I had to go back further because I could find it in law, in the colonial legal record, like I mentioned, it's in Maryland's modification to their anti-miscegenation law. And so I was interested in finding out when legal texts first began to reference a group of humanity as white people. So that was my my research focus. Once I did that, then I had to ask myself the question, well, okay, before these folks were referred to as British and other Christians or British and other freeborns, what was wrong with those labels? Why didn't they work or why didn't they continue? And what gave rise to this new reference? And so that's what I pursue in the first two chapters of the book.
Okay. And I'm saying because I think one of the points, you can correct me if I didn't read it accurately, one of the major points is that you had lower class, less powerful, I don't know what, they weren't labeled white at the time, so British, freeborn people who would eventually be classified as white. You had these people working alongside with the small number of black people, and they worked together. You say that, there was no evidence that these folks didn't get along, that they married, lived together. You really didn't have this animosity and
Correct.
Abuse of black people prior to later on in the 1600s. Did I read that accurately?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay. Okay. One of the major points why I read all that, you say that I guess there's some scholarly debate with regards to when this animosity with regards to, hey, we are going to be white, we're classifying ourselves as white, and we're going to mistreat everybody that we say are not white. When did this start? When did this idea come to be? In my view, just the fact that, and I cannot emphasize that enough, only 500 individuals of African descent. Apparently, there are not that many black people here, individuals who would be classified as black. There are not that many of them here. In my view, I've seen consistently throughout the history of white supremacy, when you're in environments where it's a very low number of non-white people, even black people, as long as the number is very low, white people can function without too much animosity. They can appear to be very nice, not lynching people, not killing everyone, not calling you names. It's when those numbers start to go up that things change drastically. That's one major point with regards to my view, because I think the idea, the notion for racism, white supremacy, even though they weren't using the term white, which I think is very important, even though that wasn't in existence in the early 1600s, I think the racism, white supremacy is already there. And you even concede some of the evidence with regards to language. The language is already structured in such a way that things that are labeled black, dark are associated with something negative. Things that are white are associated with something positive, even close to God. And I would even point, because you reference it very early in the book, William Shakespeare's Othello. In my view, that is like a 1600s version of the O.J. Simpson saga, where you have a black male who is ran crazy over this white woman. I think in my view, I would say even Othello's popularity of this play, in my view, shows that you've already got strong elements of racism, white supremacy with regards to how black people are seen, particularly around the issue that is crucial in your book, what goes down in the bedroom between black males and white women. Am I sounding crazy? Is this illogical?
Well, I don't think it's crazy, but I would just offer one possible contour to that, and that is that that the British understood themselves as British, not white. I mean, part of their idea of themselves as British was that they were Christian, and that they were, and then it became connected to whiteness. When numbers of members of native tribes became significant in whatever location British people imposed themselves, and when the numbers of African persons became more significant. So it was their sense of themselves as British that put them over and against native peoples, persons of African descent, and they initially, anyway, put themselves, I mean, look at the history of the British and the Irish. That looks very much like racism in terms of its treatment, in terms of how the British described and articulated, labeled and named, sought to enslave African people, Irish people, but it wasn't successful. And they utilized those same tactics upon native people, and we know that enslaving that group was not terribly successful, although annihilating them was, and that they then turned to persons from Africa to impose that sort of treatment. So what I'm trying to get at, Gus, is that I think I'm not sure we can call it white supremacy. Would you call it white supremacy when it was imposed against the Irish, the same practices?
What I would say is that I think white people have a long history of fighting and warring against other white people. To borrow Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., he's been a guest on our program many times. To borrow his term, I think the system of, or according to his viewpoint, the system of racism, white supremacy, what white people did was just to take a royalist system that had already been in practice with regards to abusing other individuals, exact example that you're talking about with what the British did to the so-called Irish, abusing these other individuals, and then it became, whoa, as we travel the world, wait a minute, we can just take this system and apply it on the basis of skin color, melanin, non-melanin. This will work much, much better. We can just say that everybody that is on our white team, they are all a part of the royal family and they will reign supreme, and we will just dominate everybody who is non-white. That way we won't have to be fighting amongst ourselves, and the group that we're going to terrorize and abuse, they will be immediately recognizable on the basis of skin color, and we can just do this forever because they will always be distinct, and we'll say, hey, that's the group we're dominating, all of us are down. I think that would be my interpretation of what happened.
And what I sought to do was capture what I believe is the moment in history when that treatment was applied on the basis of something called race. I mean, the idea of race didn't even exist in the 1700s. I mean, that in and of itself is a fiction that was created and imposed. But what I wanted to do, what I hope I did in the first couple chapters of that book, was to capture the moment in time when this treatment of who's going to be part of imposing this terrible treatment upon other groups of people, when that unit became white, when it became about white people.
Okay. This is also a very important one, and this is to my point, as I'm saying, even though the term, as you point out importantly, the term white is not being used, they're not classifying individuals as white in the early 1600s. This comes a little later. But I think the seeds are already there, just in the way that, I'll read. This is on page 17 of your book. In Virginia, a law was enacted in 1640 that prohibited those of African descent from possessing firearms. However, the law appears to have been ignored and unenforced. This 1640 enactment is noteworthy because it suggests a very early sign of a desire on the part of lawmakers to treat Africans in an inferior manner. It is equally noteworthy that this effort was apparently rejected by the community. Now, I would just take that paragraph right there. Now, you don't have the term white being used in 1640. That is that is extraordinary. We are going to pick out and make a law. This is not just folks talking, but to make a law to say these folks cannot have firearms on the basis it's got to be of skin color, them being of African descent. And there are not that many black people there there are only 500 individuals. So it's not like there are teams of them. And even if the law was enforced, not enforced, whatever, the fact that it was made is extraordinary. And I think that goes to my point. The idea, the seeds are already there, even though it might not be as firm as it is now, even though they're not using the same terms. This animosity or designation of dark people as a potential threat that need to be monitored and controlled, it seems like it's already there.
Absolutely. Well, that's why I cover the number of instances that I found that show the seeds of what became white supremacy. And I reference a number of them. I think what is significant, though, and I try to keep this highlighted in those chapters of the book, is that those are largely derived from a very specific group of white people, and those are the lawmakers. But when you look at the masses of whites who are there, I mean, let's face it, at this point in time in Virginia and Maryland, there's not a lot of people, period. And it was only, just to make a little correction, there's only a record of approximately 500 persons of African descent in Virginia, the colony of Virginia at that time. Not the entire, East Coast of the colonies, and that doesn't include Maryland either. So there were more persons of African descent, but in Virginia, those are what the records indicate. So I just wanted to make that clear.
All right, did you have another point? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
Right on.
I do not.
Right on. I want to move to the next chapter because I think I was in chapter 1. I want to move to some of chapter 2 where you talk about how this became so successful. But I want to double check with our co-host Justice, see if she has any questions. I do see we have some listeners who have questions too, so I'll get them as well. And then I'll get to chapter 2. Justice, if you have some questions for Professor Jacqueline Battalora, your line should be open. Please proceed. Justice, are you with us? Not hearing anything?
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Greetings, Miss Battalora.
Yes, hello.
Hello. What do you mean when you say white privilege?
Well, I don't use it actually most of the time in the book because I find it most helpful to talk about white supremacy and especially institutionalized white supremacy. So to me, and as I state in the book, white privilege is only the result. But if we want to really talk in accurate and honest ways, we need to talk about white supremacy.
How is your work constructive in working to replace white supremacy with justice?
Well, here's why I wrote the book. I had been working on white awareness trainings since 1996, I think was the year I started. And what I realized, or what would happen, is we'd get into these conversations about contemporary matters that raised race to the surface. And inevitably, the conversation would just decline into around, without it ever being spoken, of course, around just pervasive stereotypes about white people and about non-white people. And I just realized this was fruitless, that I wasn't doing, I was not going to be helpful in creating greater awareness of institutionalized white supremacy without a historical foundation being laid, so that we were not speaking in a vacuum. We needed, what I realize is that most folks in this country don't know the history of white supremacy in this country, and until we can share some knowledge, and the book that I wrote here is only one possible route to that kind of knowledge, and there are thousands of historical avenues to take that can be helpful. Mine is just one. I'm a lawyer, so I was interested in law, and I think throughout the book I keep anti-miscegenation laws and labor struggles as a constant thread to hold the various chapters together, because to me, I kept seeing those as so significant. But you could take lots of different historical routes. And so this is the one that I took, because I knew that if I'm going to talk about race in my classes, if I'm going to attempt to move myself and others in a more constructive, just way in the world through white awareness trainings, I have to have a shared historical something that everyone in that group can share, like a base of knowledge, because people don't have it, and so people end up talking out of stereotypes, which is what people do know, sadly, because they're regularly repeated and in your face every time you turn on a television, or watch a YouTube or the other sources of media that we turn to, and so that's why I wrote this book, is to serve that purpose, to be one of many possibilities. I mean, I think, Gus, that you interviewed in the past, Ian F. Haney LÄ§pez, whose book is another fantastic route to build a historical foundation from which people can pursue historically grounded conversations around race.
I heard you say last time that you gave your white students an assignment saying to tell their parents that they're going to marry a non-white person to see what their parents' reaction is. I was just curious, do you still give your students that assignment, and what else have you learned from giving that assignment?
I do. I continue to give it. Well, I have to admit some depression there, because what I find, which is completely consistent with the history that I write about in that book, is that white males are white parents give much more flexibility to white males in terms of their marital choice that goes outside of their racial identity, but that for white females, it is far less common for parents to respond in a positive way. And so I just had typed up the last 5 years of student responses, just to get number tallies of how many. And one of the things that I have students do is to say not only what they can anticipate their parents saying when you share this news with them, but why? How do you know that that's likely to be what happens? Like, I expect them to give some concrete examples from their interactions, words they've overheard, again, to kind of give some substantiation to what their assumptions are. But I've had this tallied up, and frankly, for the 21st century, it's depressing. But we just had a verdict in the Zimmerman trial, which is another just depressing piece of evidence that we have. There is so much work to do to challenge white supremacy. It's deeply, deeply embedded.
How do you get your white students to stop practicing white supremacy racism when you see or hear them practicing?
Well, I don't know that I do. I know that this work, this awareness of this history, I know that for many students it has a significant impact in terms of their awareness, and whether that translates for them in how they choose to be in the world, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a theologian. I don't do therapy with them. I teach a sociology class, and so I offer the historical, socio-legal information, and I just make it clear that when we act in these ways, we are enacting white supremacy. And so, they make their own choices in the world, how they wish to be, what kind of person they want to be, whether they wish to be those who either blindly continue white supremacy or they're going to take a stand. One of the things that I do with my students is I do have them try to confront sort of real-world situations that students have, subsequent to my class, come to me and ask for advice. How do I handle this? And so I share some of those situations with them, and I say, okay, let's say this happens. What are you going to do? And what, you want to keep your job, you don't want to lose it. And sometimes I give them situations where I just say, look, you can respond this way, and you'll very likely lose your job. And that's okay as long as you know that's where you're going. and so I try to get them to think of other ways so that they can push and take a stand and perhaps be less likely to move their job. Is there another avenue for you to challenge and push them? So then we start to look at political avenues and other things like that. So that's one thing that I do with this particular class. It's social construction of gender and race.
How did you feel when your white friends didn't want to hang out with you when they knew you were with a black person?
Well, I think I was upset and angry at the time. I wasn't very sophisticated in my analysis of what was happening and why. Again, I had lived in Europe for much of my childhood, and coming to southern Texas was a pretty big shock to me. And so, at least I had that European experience that helped me just know that part of what I was experiencing, or at least I could think so at the time, was in part regional. And so I had that, but it felt crappy. And the truth of the matter is, the only person who I could talk to at that time about what was happening and how I was being treated was Ricky himself. So the truth of the matter is, those instances, in many ways, just brought us closer because I didn't have to explain anything to him. He lived with this nonsense every day.
I know you teach mostly white people, and you said you have concluded that white people are required to maintain white supremacy and will not be voluntarily replacing it with justice. Why do you want your main audience to be white people?
Well, let me just clarify a couple things. I have said, and I say this in my classes all the time, I talk about it in terms of gender and race, and we could talk about it in terms of other fault lines in our society as well. But because those two are the topics of my course, I talk about the fact that even women are required to participate in misogyny, required to participate in our own objectification just to be successful. And so by the end of that section of the course, students can articulate the ways in which we all are required to participate in misogyny, even women. And so anyway, so that's one part. And then when I move into the race section of focus in the class, I begin with that same claim that we are all, not just the white kids, all of us in this country are required to participate to some degree, and of course degrees are important, I don't want to lose those, to participate in white supremacy just to be successful. Like they wouldn't be in college, they wouldn't be that kind of success already if they didn't participate in white supremacy to some degree. And then by the end of the class, I let them answer that on an exam.
Thank you. Gus, go ahead.
Context of White Supremacy. I was going to read chapter, or discuss a little bit from chapter 2, where you talk about labeling and the exercise that you do with your class, making one group the pures and putting grading restrictions with regards to the highest grade that they can achieve based on if they are in the pures group or if they're in the non-pures group. But I want to move, just because of what you just touched on with regards to gender, I want to move a little bit further ahead in the book, and I'll just make note to come back to that section. You talk quite a bit in your book about white male patriarchy with regards to what was happening when the system of racism, white supremacy was being solidified in the U.S. This is on page 38 in your book. This is a quote, and then it goes to your own words. Magistrates prosecuted primarily white women and black men. White males claimed the right to govern all women regardless of race. The sole sexual possession of white women by white men assured perpetuation of the dominant, pure white race. Your words. In this way, anti-miscegenation law worked to integrally link whiteness with the control of white women's and non-white men's sexuality and relationality. As part of the legal package of benefits for whites that the Virginia lawmakers passed in the aftermath of Bacon's Rebellion, the benefits derived from anti-miscegenation law come to light through the emphasis of control within the language of the law and the enforcement practices that followed. From these, we see that the law largely controlled the sexual and marital relations of white women and non-white men, and simultaneously made more women available to white men. Such a trade in women's bodies was nothing new. As moral entrepreneurs, the lawmakers cite British nationhood, Christianity, and the prevention of abominable beings, in quotes, as rationale for the law. The law did far more than control the sexuality and relationality of white women and non-white men. It created a criminal. Where a child was born, the law created an abomination. Virginia's anti-miscegenation law of 1691 begins by describing children born of a biological parent understood to be English or white, and a biological parent who was understood as Negro, mulatto, or Indian as that abominable mixture and spurious issue. Through this descriptive alchemy, the General Assembly not only worked to create the human category white, but also a human body anathema to their colonial society. These children were shaped in law as representative of abomination and false descendants. Virginia's anti-miscegenation law required not only that a free English woman who gave birth to a child fathered by a man from one of the prohibited classifications relinquish the child, but also that she pay a fine or face 5 additional years of servitude. In this way, the law served a version of capitalism that relied on non-paid or underpaid laborers and highlights the sexual vulnerability of women laborers. The law blocked those relationships between whites and those of native tribes or persons of African descent that took an intimate and consensual form from The law blocked those relationships between whites and those of native tribes or persons of African descent that took an intimate and consensual form from being legitimized by the community and from receiving the protections and exercising the responsibilities created by marriage law. In addition, these laws placed the financial burden as well as the burden of public shame for mixed pregnancies upon women. White men who had children with women understood as not white did so largely to the advancement of their investment in property or that of the landowner for whom they labored. The law that linked a child's status as enslaved or free to the status of the mother legitimized the sexual violation of women of African descent, while anti-miscegenation law worked to violate the legitimacy of sexuality for all women. Two laws combined, according to Steve Martineau, to make normative the judicially authoritative violation of women's humanity by rendering women instruments. Women of African descent were made capital and thus instruments of wealth production. White women were made bearers of purity and thus instruments of white supremacy. This is page 38 and 39 from Birth of a Nation. I'll get your thoughts on this section. What is it that you hope readers understand from the passage I just read?
Well, I wanted people to get that people tend to there are two very oversimplified ways in which anti-miscegenation law tends to get read, including by academics. Anti-miscegenation law, I read it all the time in academic books. It's referenced as laws that made interracial marriage illegal. That is factually incorrect. Anti-miscegenation laws made it illegal only where one party was white from marrying various other non-white groups. So they didn't prohibit interracial marriages. For instance, a person of African descent could marry a person of Chinese descent. This law didn't care about that. What they cared about was this thing they invented called whiteness, white people, around these ideas of so-called white purity. So that's one comment to make about anti-miscegenation. The other thing is that it gets treated as sort of this equal playing field for white men and white women, and that wasn't the case at all. The white men were rarely prosecuted for violating the law, and when they did, it was because they dared the work of Bynum. I apologize, I can't remember her first name, but her work reveals that when white men were prosecuted for violating anti-miscegenation law, it tended to be because they dared to treat a non-white woman in public with the respect only due to a white person, a white woman. So anti-miscegenation law was very much not only a law about that worked to advance white supremacy, but it did so in a way that located patriarchal power squarely within white men or among white men.
I believe the author you were referencing, Victoria Bynum, her book Unruly Women, The Politics of Social and Sexual Control in the Old South, 1992. I had several listeners who commented on that passage. Before I read their comment, I'll read one more section because I think, unless I misread, this is a pretty important point. It pops up regularly in your book, which you just laid out about white women being subject to white male patriarchy. This is just page 41, just reading one paragraph. Meanings assigned to white skin were not the same for all people. Rather, the meanings assigned within the four corners, i.e. written words of the document, of the law as well as through enforcement practices took a gendered form. Similarly, the privileges offered to whites were not guaranteed absolutely, but depended both upon the maintenance of a group or groups understood as other, e.g. Negroes, mulattoes, Indians, and required that individual people rendered white remain within the gendered confines of what it meant to be a white woman or a white man to the extent that anti-miscegenation law worked to embed white supremacy in law. It did so in part through an exchange in white women's bodies. I will share the listeners' comments first, and then I'll give my thoughts on this. One of our female listeners, Brucey Fine, she said her first comment, I'll read them in the order I got them. Her first comment when I read that section, marketing of the white woman as innocent of practicing, maintaining, and benefiting from racism, white supremacy, as a victim of the white man and friend to her victim of racism, white supremacy. Bruce finds she feels the white woman is the other stakeholder in the system of white supremacy. Her other comment, she said, instruments, because she used the term instrument, saying the white woman's body, it's an instrument of racism, white supremacy. She said she is not an instrument, meaning the white woman, again, is the other stakeholder. When I read this, and this is a pattern that I've noted, and I feel like this is very dangerous, because I hear this frequently when people bring up patriarchy as if white women are not equally dangerous in the system of white supremacy. It almost sounds as if white women in the 1600s, 1700s, antebellum America were not practicing racism, white supremacy, that white men just had everyone in their vile grip, be they white woman, non-white male, non-white female, and I could not disagree more strongly. Certainly, you have a pecking order amongst white people. Absolutely. All white people do not have the same amount of power. But you would not have individuals classified as white if you did not have a willing racist participant in the white woman. Now, with the anti-miscegenation laws specifically, I look at this as business. Some of this just comes down to pure biology. It is my understanding. I mean, everyone stop even before I proceed. Keep in mind, we're not talking about 21st century medical advances. We're talking about 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, where it was routine for someone to die in childbirth. If we are talking about the business of maintaining white supremacy racism as a system at a time where, as you already pointed out, you didn't have as many people, life expectancy was a lot lower, childbirth is a lot more risky, you cannot have white women just running around willy-nilly having sexual intercourse with any slave, buck, Negro that they choose. That cannot work. If they get pregnant, they could potentially die. And as you said, there was a gender imbalance with regards to population. You had a lot more white males in the colonies during this time period than you did white females. You point that out. That is also hugely important. If that is true, you have it in your book, so if that's true, and the biology part that I'm talking about, you still have, it could be a risk with regards to pregnancy, the mom could die. Business decision, hey, white men, you're not going to die. You can go out, rape as many black females as you want to, and in fact, let's even encourage that, because if you produce a child, according to the laws that you have in your book, they're going to be slaves. I'm increasing our profit. This is good for the business of racism, white supremacy, for white males, Thomas Jefferson et al. To go out and have as much sex with as many slaves, niggers as they please. You cannot extend that same freedom to white women. That could severely damage the business if they're going out, plus that whole 9-month period. If she should get pregnant, if she has sexual intercourse with a non-white male, she cannot produce white children. I think it has been established, unless I'm incorrect, white people have said only the white woman can consistently, reliably produce children who will be labeled as white if they're having sexual intercourse with another white person. I do not read this at all as, oh man, the poor white woman is victim of white man. I view this is business. This is what we have got to do to make sure that we are successful as a white army to dominate these non-white people. And that white woman was every bit a racist and terrorist on the plantation to black people, non-white people, period. I'm even reminded of Valerie Jackson, her book Property, which is fiction, make sure I'm acknowledging is fiction, but and this is a white woman who wrote this, Valerie Jackson. She said the whole point to point out the role of white women on the plantation and not giving them a pass, so we boo-hoo and think of them as Scarlett O'Hara, Gone with the Wind. No, they are equal partners, maybe less powerful, but every bit as complicit in the system of racism, even 1700s, 1800s, antebellum South. Your response?
Well, in no way by referencing the gender components of anti-miscegenation law, by no means, by mentioning that, did I in any way mean to imply, I certainly don't say in the book that white women are any less indicted by white supremacy in this country, because that's simply, not true. But the way in which the law worked and impacted white women was simply different. But to conclude that means I'm saying that white women are less culpable to the institution of white supremacy is I didn't say that at all, and it is not intended by any means. I'm merely capturing some of the nuances of the law itself and how it was practiced.
That is not what I got, particularly when that word white male patriarchy is used. That is not what it suggests to me. To me, it suggests that this is a white man thing and that white females, because you make a point. This comes up over and over in your book where you talk about how white females, they can't own property and all of their benefits come from having with a white man. You put that in the book, that they can't have property in their name.
But that was the law. I'm simply referencing law, Gus. This isn't a matter of interpretation.
No problem.
In those passages, I'm talking about law, the law of coverture. And so the fact of the matter was that law had these restrictions along gender lines. Now, did that mean that white women who in the confines of a shared location or property or plantation couldn't treat non-white people in deplorable ways, and they very likely may have? Sure.
They very likely may have.
Well, no. But Gus, you can't conflate the historical evidence of the ways in which the masses of Europeans, because they weren't white people yet, the ways in which the masses of Europeans interacted with the smaller numbers of persons of African descent and native tribes. What we tend to do, and what I'm concerned is happening right now in this conversation, is that you're imposing a post-white people, after the invention of white people and after the laws that allowed white people to be invented in the first place, that dramatically altered colonial society in ways that we are all too familiar with. But that wasn't always the case. At least the evidence, I wasn't around. All I can do is turn to historical evidence. The evidence doesn't support that sort of animosity was there. It quickly grew after this invention of a group of humanity called whites, and that was done through the imposition of laws, and those are referenced largely in Chapter 2.
Okay. With the point that you just said, and I want to make note that totally deviates from what I was talking about with regards to white women. That is important, and I have seen where white people will do this, will dislocate the conversation to talk about something else, and I think that could be a conscious act of racism, white supremacy, but it's no problem. I will take care of both of those. The point that you raised that deviated, all of that you're talking about the creation of a white race, these people weren't labeled as white, all of that is 17th century stuff. From 1700 forward, everything is there. The animosity, the disregard for black people, it's all there. White race is there. System is rolling. So what you're talking about is almost totally irrelevant to what I said.
But that's what I'm
not done.
You're talking about two chapters of my book, Gus.
I'm not done.
And in those two chapters, I'm only in the 17th century. You can't switch centuries in reference to my book.
Can I finish my point? You're talking about white women with these anti-miscegenation law. Now, you're using the term white to reference these individuals, okay? I'm just reading from what you got in your book. You're using the term white. So if you feel it's correct to reference them as white, I think it's accurate as well. And my point was, these white women are every bit as culpable in the practice of racism, white supremacy. You do not have individuals as white, whether you want to put that in quotes or not. There's no way you can have white males or white females for generations if you don't have white women who are willing participants in the system of white supremacy. It is not possible. Now, you can
I'm
argue
not
that either
arguing
way.
that.
Okay, what I'm saying is, hang on, because I'm not done yet. What I am saying in your book, to me, the terms that you use, saying white male patriarchy, and I can even read another passage, just the terms that you use, to me, suggest that the white woman is not culpable, that the white woman, too, was subject to white men, that we're talking about white male patriarchy. And I don't agree, even though I see, yes, of course you have different power between groups of white people. As I said, you have a pecking order, but these folks are all a part of the same white army dedicated to terrorizing non-white people. I'll just read your book and we'll see. This is on page 41.
I don't disagree with that.
I will let you finish. I just want to read this. And like I said, listeners can use your common
sense. I can't even remember. You talk so long, I can't even remember where you start.
Hang on. I'm sorry if your memory is failing. I will read and I'll allow you to respond. This is on page 41. Post-Bacon's Rebellion laws reveal gender, class, and race. Now, I would even say right there, the fact that gender is mentioned first. This is not listed alphabetically. Why would gender be the first thing that we talk about? Moving forward, you say post-Bacon's Rebellion, laws reveal gender, class, and race as interconnected systems that support, constitute, and reconstitute each other. Intersectionality at work, where privilege was created for whites through anti-miscegenation law, it was done in part through the reinforcement of a gender hierarchy wherein women were rendered inferior to men. Through this law and its enforcement patterns, privilege on the basis of an emerging race called white is built in, and through privilege and authority established on the basis of gender, where authority over women was secured in marriage through common law, it was denied to a tribal man or a man of African descent relative to a white woman. Here, racial constructs are enforced through a granting or denial of the prevailing gender hierarchy. The fact that laboring Europeans and Africans in Virginia married each other with acceptance prior to the post-Bacon's Rebellion period, and the fact that anti-miscegenation law subsequently thrived in excess of 300 years helps reflect the dramatic social change that was brought about in the decades following the rebellion. What could bring about such a radical transformation among the laboring classes? Is it to a consideration of this change that we will now turn? I will stop there. If you would like to respond, I will hush.
I'm studying law, and I would be inept in my articulation of anti-miscegenation law without capturing the law of coverture and indicating those differences, just like I would be inept if I talked about black people and only referenced the experience in law of black men. And capturing that difference that's reflected in the laws that prevailed at that time does not in any way mean that because those laws created power differentials, in no way says that or means that those white people on the lower end of the power rungs didn't fully participate in institutionalized white supremacy through the enactments that began to build after Bacon's Rebellion.
Right on. Again, the book, Birth of a White Nation, The Invention of White People and Its Relevance Today. Jacqueline Battalora, Ph.D., professor at Xavier University. We do have callers. I will get the folks who have questions. The number again is 760-569-7676. And the code is 564-943#. I will remind listeners, I am a victim of racism. It is very possible that I could have misinterpreted Professor Battalora's work. I would just say that I consistently see this pattern where white women are moved away from being practitioners of racism, white supremacy. You said that that was not your intention. I didn't get that from reading the book, but I could be wrong. But I do see a pattern consistently where white women are not thought of as practitioners of racism, white supremacy. They are thought of as victims, that they too are suffering from the white man. I don't agree, and I think that is a very dangerous concept. As I've said consistently, do not sleep on or with white women. Super dangerous. The Trayvon Martin trial, white women's fingerprints all over it, if you need a current day example. The people that dialed in, I think he's from your neck of the woods. Shadow, your line should be open. Did you have a question for Professor Jacqueline Battalora?
Hello, Gus. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Professor Battalora, I had a question about the Irish. You said that they were not enslaved. I've gotten into discussions with Irish people about them being enslaved, and they said that they were. I just wanted to know. You said that just two questions. Were they enslaved? And if they weren't, why wasn't it successful as far as you know?
Well, I'm not a specialist on the Irish experience. In my book, I talk about the Irish upon their arrival, especially the Irish Catholics who were running away from a potato famine. But the British did not have great success enslaving the Irish. And, according to the British, it's because the Irish were too untamable. I mean, that tends to be how the British described that failure. And then the British came in and practiced, burn and torture to just if they couldn't enslave the Irish, the approach was then at least we're going to wipe out their resources and take their land.
Okay, thank you then. Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay.
Right on. Lashes, did you have a question for Professor Battalora? Lashes, you there? I'm not hearing. Did you mute your line? Not sure if you maybe muted or... Okay. I will check back again. Lashes, if you did have a question, not hearing you, maybe you can hang up and dial again or, check to see if you muted your line or what have you. I'll check back once we get our next caller. S. Dot, did you have a question for Professor Battalora? Your line should be open. S. Dot, are you with us? Very interesting. Hearing S. Dot either. I will double check.
All right, come back, please.
Oh, okay. I can hear you. Oh, he might have needed. I didn't hear if you did you need a second, S. Dot? Is that what it was? I know you got parenting duties. Did you need?
Yeah, save the screen and come back to me.
Oh, okay. All right. I guess two people are having audio issues. Yes, ma'am.
That's okay. Gus, if we don't have a question, a person ready to present a question, may I provide some more information as to why I felt a consideration of patriarchy was so important for this work?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, it was important because patriarchy was a significant form of power for men. For men, for the masses of men, actually, right? Because for rich men, power could come through their financial resources or land ownership. But for the masses of men, their masculinity and their power as men came through patriarchy. And those were established, again, through the laws of coverture, which gave men literally this significant bag of legal rights and privileges over women and over children. Patriarchy is critical because it reveals patriarchy in the hands of white men as a tool in both the creation and support of white supremacy. Secondarily, it's important because this history reveals through the laws that passed after Bacon's Rebellion the ways in which black men, that their power, very few had the finances and resources to exercise authority in the financial way, and the laws, if you review them, work to strip them of any patriarchal power. And so patriarchy as a source, as a resource to deny masculinity and male power, I think it is critical to the story of the invention of white people and institutionalized white supremacy.
Okay. I will table my response to see if our listeners, if they have any questions, so I don't allow them to miss out. Let's see. We'll double check again. S. Or Lashes, did you all have a question?
Hi, good evening to you and your guests. I have a quick question. In your research in conducting or writing this book, did most of the laws that were created around race centered in the state of Virginia?
Virginia and Maryland took precedence.
Based on your research within the law specifically, do you know why that is?
Sure. Because their economy was one that depended, they both grew tobacco. It was the backbone of their economy. Tobacco growing requires tremendous human labor. And so the economy, the foundation of the economy in both of those colonies required significant numbers of laborers. And the economic success of the power brokers in those colonies sought, the least paid laborers as possible, and eventually won out by having non-paid laborers in the form of African slaves.
Okay. And were those two states also the state that was able to accumulate most, I can't think, this is a bad term, but most votes as far as like congressional seats or anything in that time? Like,
well, at this point they're calling it.
You know what I'm trying to. Sorry, the whole 3/4 clause in reference to.
Well, the period I'm talking about, at least in reference to the invention of white period, the invention of white people, and when that came about, is pre-formation of the United States. So these are British colonies at the time.
Mainly from the Anglo-Saxon perspective, way of doing things, correct?
Yes.
And my second question would be, prior to you coming to the United States as a teen, as an adult now, what is the difference between the practice of racism, white supremacy in Europe and that of inside the United States? And what is the meaning of whiteness, respectively, in both continents?
I don't have an answer to that question. What I can tell you is I lived in Europe until I was 10 years old. And so while living in Europe, I lived in Antwerp, Belgium, I had never seen a very dark-skinned person. The sort of group that I remember hearing about as sort of the other, as a child living in Belgium, was gypsies. So they were sort of the targeted group, and were marginalized and stereotyped in very negative ways. So I didn't get. I couldn't watch television because I didn't speak Flemish. So, you know what I mean? So I was very protected from the sort of racial information that I might have learned while living in Belgium. So I have to say that. I didn't get where I did learn a tremendous amount about race was when we spent summers in the Chicagoland area. And those are my most vivid experiences of learning these categories and what they were supposed to mean, who to be cautious of, who to trust, those sorts of messages. And I can't speak about a contemporary. That's not an area of study for me. I'd be very curious to know the answer myself.
Okay. And my last comment would be, a friend of mine is also listening to the show, and when you were explaining the true definition of miscegenation law, her response was as follows: but if non-white people were legally barred from marrying white people, it's clear that whites are really the only race, because even white people didn't see two non-whites marrying as interracial couples. So would you agree with her response that in the pre-creation of whiteness in the United States, it was the people we call white people today who are really the race of people, since they do have an agenda or a purpose of some sort? You know what I mean?
I'm afraid I didn't follow that.
What part you did not follow?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's being said. In my reference to my explanation of anti-miscegenation was that anti-miscegenation laws only prohibited white people from marrying non-white people, but it didn't. Those laws were not concerned with non-white groups marrying across racial, so-called racial lines.
Correct. So my friend thinks that then if non-white people were legally barred from marrying white people, these are the classifications we use today, it's clear that whites during that time are really the only race. Do you understand how?
No. Well, look, here's what gets so And I address this at the beginning of the book. Like, one of the frustrations is, like, I'm trying to show that these racial categories that we have are a fiction. They're not biologically bound. They are real, of course, in that they've been given tremendous social meaning. Right? We all live with that. We just saw it played out in the Trayvon Martin case, and the Zimmerman trial. So they're real because we've given them this meaning, and it's so deeply embedded. It's hard to imagine that realness, if you will, not being with us for a long time. But race itself is a fiction, and the concept of race did not even emerge until much later. So it's so hard to. I even say, like, even in my book, I'm focusing on this group of people called white people who eventually became conceived as this race. And race, the concept itself, is derived from the inbreeding of animals, and it was never applied to human beings until these ideas about differentiation among people, worked to the advantage of white people. So this gets complicated because we use this terminology that of race that isn't even wasn't relevant at the time.
So if I understand you correctly, you said that race back then was only used in reference to animals and producing numbers of animals, like cattle?
That is correct.
Really?
Yes.
What year? In your research, what year was that terminology used, and where can I find it?
Well, there's just like I think the point Gus was trying to make about the whole. I really wanted to get to the moment where I saw this reference to this group of people as whites being used. I wanted to get to that, and Gus, has made the point that look, there was already stuff seeds in the ground that allowed that to happen, and I hope that I captured that in the book as well, because of course that is true. The same is true of this concept of race. There's no one moment that's so distinct, but it was a process, and this invention of this group of people called white people was a part of a significant seed, if you will, that allowed for this conception of human beings into these separate racial groups. And you really see this idea of race getting solidified and folks running off with it, especially, anthropologists and sociologists. I think anthropology takes the blame, if you will, for much of it in the 19th century.
In correlation to your point, I would think of like how society referenced dog, meaning a half mutt, a pure breed, of this breed, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what's coming to my mind. And when you say race was used in reference to animals and the production of them, did they actually use the term race as we do today, the physical word R-A-C-E, or was there another term but meant what we use race today? To my knowledge, there's not another term. And race at that time referred to like a breeding line. Literally. It wasn't an acronym for anything. It was just the word race.
Not.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
S. If you want to get your question in, try quickly. I definitely had to get this. This is in the afterword. This is another one that I've heard from several other white people. And I would go back to that question that was asked kind of at the top of the broadcast about, are white people going to voluntarily stop practicing racism, white supremacy? You said your general answer would be no. You think there are small pockets of those folks of which you hope that you are one, but generally no. And we have asked a lot of white people, and I can only think of one. I think there were maybe two, but one of them was J. Love Calderon, racist suspect, white woman, who said, oh no, I think there's lots of evidence that white people are going to voluntarily stop doing this. And, she said what she said on the program. But this is on 97 where this is the afterward, where you ask that very question, why would whites work to dismantle whiteness? And that's another one, I hate that term. It's not accurate. We're not getting to the nitty gritty. Why would whites work to dismantle racism, white supremacy? I think that would be most accurate. But anyway, people often...
Fair enough.
Oh, or fair too. People often ask me why white people would challenge. I'm just going to replace whiteness in here because I think it would be accurate.
That's fine. You can use white supremacy. It works perfectly.
Thank you. People often ask me why white people would challenge white supremacy since it confers so many unearned advantages to those classified as or merely presumed to be white. There are a number of motivating factors. First, when white people become aware of their unearned advantages and understand that such advantages only exist by virtue of unearned harms meted out to those raced other than white, most are unnerved by the injustice. Additionally, as whites realize that the preferential meanings that have been assigned to the status white only exist by virtue of the degradation of those rendered not white, or contingent white for no other reason than their racial status. They are interested in correcting this social inequality. Now, I will stop right there. I just want to read that last sentence one more time. Additionally, as whites realize that their preferential meanings, as whites realize that the preferential meanings that have been assigned to the status white only exist by virtue of the degradation of those rendered not white or contingent white for no other reason than their racial status, they are interested in correcting this social equality. Have you seen any evidence that this is true?
Well, I have. I have in institutional settings. I have seen teachers at various grade levels of K through 12 in particular, and at the higher education level, and seen actions taken as a result. Do I know? I mean, do I see people in their homes, in their daily lives, and have that sort of monitoring evidence? No. What I do know is that, and maybe, Gus, this was my hesitation to answer your sort of very, are white people, is there evidence of white people relinquishing white supremacy? And maybe it's my naivete, but why bother writing this book if I don't have some faith in even white humanity and the possibility of transformation? I mean, otherwise, why waste my time? I do have some belief. I have seen some evidence of people sometimes who seem to take this information and seem to be changed. Am I there to monitor how long that lasts or how that transpires in their lives? No, absolutely not. But I have faith in that possibility. I believe that my experience as a young person with Ricky and the environment around me, I mean, I guess I could have left it really hateful, but I haven't left that way. I have that wasn't all of my experience. I also saw people and have experienced people, including white people, who are doing, at least by my view, seem to be working very hard to be just.
I want to respond, but I want to read a passage from your book. This is on 103, all from the afterword. 103, you write, the harm from white supremacy. And you, in this section of the book, you have a lot of different photographs of lynchings. One of them in Florida. We've been talking about that a lot. You have a lot of pictures of lynchings with regards to, this is the grisly history. This is what racism, white supremacy produces. So you write, the harm from white supremacy that these lynching images capture is not only the blatant murderous harm to those communities who were the target of white lynch mobs. These images reveal a defective humanity within those communities that enacted and participated in lynching, and within a nation that condoned lynching by failing to prosecute those who murdered. The history of lynchings reveals harm and the effects of brutal violence at multiple levels. It dramatically exposes the harm to Black Americans whose bodies were tortured, hung, burned, and dismembered. Just as there is general recognition that something was wrong with those German soldiers who participated in the slaughter of other human beings labeled Jews, gays, or disabled people, there is evidence of a similar defect in the white people who participated in and tolerated lynchings in the United States. I'll stop right there. I was going to read some more, but you go on to talk about how this is the why with regards to racism, white supremacy being replaced with justice. This is why white people should want to do it, to regain their humanity. And I've heard this before from white people. Timothy Wise, admitted racist, who's been on the program many times. This is one of his big pushes, that he's doing this work not for non-white people, but he's doing it for white people to help. He almost said it verbatim, what you wrote out in the book. And I do not believe a single white person who says that. You, Timothy, any of them. I agree with your statement that white people, there is something defective about white people where they have a pathology, a proclivity for practicing white terrorism worldwide. But I don't see any evidence, not this book, not the White Privilege Conference, not Timothy Wise, not Peggy McIntosh, not Noel Ignatieff, not a single iota of evidence that white people are sincerely interested in dismantling this system and treating everyone, non-white people, especially black people, in a just manner. White people could do this in like 24 hours if they were really serious. We're tired of this. We're tired of the Trayvon Martins. We're tired of Questlove and all these people having to complain about being humiliated and shot by enforcement officers. This could stop real quick. It's getting worse. I've even hearing white people, growing numbers of white people. We had a guest on the program this week who are saying it's getting worse. Racism is becoming more acceptable to just be blatantly, trifling, and tackling racist. I see more and more evidence of that every day. And with regards to why would you write this book if you have no faith that white people are not going to change, in my view, any white person who says, you know what, Gus, I hear you. It makes total sense, and I can understand how any black person, given our history, would be very suspicious of a white person and would probably not believe us. I feel you. However, I want to be honest, and I want to get rid of this system. They could just start by telling the truth about white people. Just start by saying, you know what? These white folks are not interested in ending racism. Let's just get that up front and center. When I was at the White Privilege Conference in 2010 with you, that was one of my main questions that I asked in a workshop. Before we hop into all of this,
you're going in and out, but I think I have the gist.
Okay, I will. I hope I'm not being lost for listeners because this is important. When I was at the White Privilege Conference, I was in a workshop and I asked, are white people going to voluntarily stop practicing racism? And many of the white people in the room...
Gus, you're out. I can't hear you at all anymore.
Okay, I will hang up and dial back in, see if that clears my line out. Hang on one second. Listen.
Can you hear me?
This is Jacqueline Battalora. I can hear you.
Oh, I was a caller who called in with a question.
I'd love to hear your question.
Okay, maybe he having technical difficulty, but I'd ask my question anyway. My question is, I know that it was mentioned that you included a number of images of lynchings in your work. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay. With that being said, and I have heard a number of other guests who classify themselves as white and say that they are making an effort to work against the system of racism, white supremacy. And that being said, and considering...
Oh, I lost you. I'm afraid I can't hear you.
Am I being heard?
I can now hear you, Gus. I lost my listener who was making a comment in light of the lynching images. But
I heard lots of tech interference at that point. That is, I heard S. I'm hoping he'll dial back in. It looks like he got disconnected. I hope he'll get in because I wanted to hear his question about the lynchings. Okay, he's back with us. All right.
Oh, good. Okay.
All right, S. Your line is open. S. You with us, sir?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
All right.
My call dropped. To the guests, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay. I don't know if you heard what I was saying, but what I was saying was that considering the considerable resources of those who classify themselves as white, and many of which who have put out similar work like yours, depicting images of individuals who participated in so-called lynchings and so forth. If there's a sincere effort on the parts of those individuals and yourself, why do you think that there hasn't been any individual to date that has made an effort to go back and unearth the identities of those individuals in those photos, the identities of their surviving family members, and to really document what impact those lynchings have had on those particular individuals and or their surviving family members? I haven't seen any work that goes into looking at the mindset of those individuals who committed those
Hello?
He's still with us? Looks like he's still with us.
Was he done? Should I respond?
I'm not sure. It looks like he got disconnected.
Okay.
Lots of tech issues. I think I got the gist of the question about why haven't.
Yeah, I think I did too. Well, my God, there is so much that needs to be examined and explored, from the harms of white supremacy and enactments of violence. I talk in the book a little bit about the Texas Rangers, and the year before the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, when our country doubled in size, 60% of Mexicans who owned land that now became the United States, 60% of them owned land, and within a decade, less than 30% of them did. And that's one of the concrete pieces of evidence we have that's the result of theft by white lawyers, a corrupt legal system that exploited the way in which title to land was held from Mexico versus what is recognized in law in the United States, and then lynchings of persons, Mexican persons. And that we have so much research to be done around the issue that gets into the effects, the historical effects on communities of these sorts of harms. That's partly why I really highlighted the loss of patriarchal power, because Gus, you still wanted to comment on that, so I wanted to reopen that for you. One of the reasons I thought it was so important to capture that loss of patriarchal power in black families was because, like, I remember, throughout the 80s and 90s, there was this whole, what's wrong with black men, and, what is black masculinity, and, there are very, very real reasons that we are shaped the way we are shaped today, and it's because of our past, and our laws have played a big role, not an exclusive role, but a big role in shaping them.
Did that answer your question, S.Dot? I thought he was back with us. Should be able to hear us. Did that answer your question?
It's less of an answer than a recognition, I think. Okay.
His line should be open if, I don't know if he muted or if he heard the response, but your line is open if you want to respond. If you felt like that was adequate, that's cool too. I will respond.
Hey, Gus, just to let you know, I only have about 5 more minutes. I have a little girl who's been waiting for me to be put to bed.
Right on. We will see if we can knock it out in 5 minutes. I want to make sure I top what I was saying when I got disrupted with regards to the why. I would say, number one, you said that it might be your naivete. I would say for all non-white people, victims of racism, there should never be an assumption of naivete on the part of white people. Ever, 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 ever. I wouldn't care if it was a 10-year-old white person or a 110-year-old white person. White people are not ignorant about racism. Suspicion should be there. With regards to why would you write such a book like this, if white people are not going to stop practicing racism, it could be an act of racism, white supremacy to write a book that does not give an accurate understanding of white people, racism, white supremacy, and how it operates. I have concluded that that is one of the refined ways that white people practice racism, by controlling the dialogue on conversations around racism, white supremacy, how people think about racism, white supremacy, how they understand the system and what should be done to undermine it. As long as Timothy Wise and Dr. Peggy McIntosh, as long as these white people are able to control that conversation, this system can go on and on and on, because the non-white people, if they're reading this material, they're not getting an accurate understanding of white people, and in my view, it's really dangerous because they think, hey, Timothy and Jacqueline Battalora and Dr. Peggy McIntosh, there are some white people who are really interested in ending this system. And as I've said, that is not true at all. I've seen no evidence from any of these white folks, yourself included. With the patriarchy point, I was going to read, but since we only have 5 minutes left and I want to make sure you have a chance to respond, I would just say with regards to patriarchy, and you said it was important because this was how white men asserted their masculinity through dominating females. I would say in my observation...
I tried to say the law created a resource, and it was imposed by law called coverture.
Okay. At any rate, what I would say, I think the laws and every other aspect of white culture, white men, and I think this has been true for centuries, the primary means of them flexing their masculinity is through practicing racism, white supremacy, whether that be the lynching images that you have in your book, the whole sad spectacle that we got with Trayvon Martin and the trial, which I would say would be white women flexing their womanhood, since you had a white judge, white prosecutor, mostly white jury. I would say white women also get to flex their femininity through practicing racism, white supremacy. I'm even reminded of an admitted racist that I spoke with. She said that she felt a stronger sense of femininity and womanhood, knowing that black males specifically found her sexually attractive. She said if that was taken away, she would feel less powerful as a white woman, less powerful as a racist, because she admitted to being a racist. So I don't agree. Even though those laws are there, I totally agree. Yes, there's a power differential. Yes. White men mistreat white women. White people mistreat white people, other white people. Yes, long history of that. However, there is a total understanding amongst the global white army. We are supposed to be terrorizing and dominating non-white people. Nothing is supposed to disrupt that, not our little squabbles and feuds with each other or anything else. Primary objective, dominate everyone that we say is not white. And white males, in my view, their masculinity is contingent, and white women, their femininity is contingent upon that system remaining in place. And I'll give you the last word. I just want to read this quote from your book really quick, because I think this goes to what I was saying earlier about how I think you do suggest that white women are somehow not as complicit in white supremacy. This is 66 and 67. You write that white ideology was built from the idea of those deemed sufficiently like the British and has shaped U.S. history in profound ways. It has constructed American as consistent with white. It has worked to commodify women's bodies in racialized ways. White women as those who must preserve white purity, and non-white women as sex slaves, laborers at the bottom rung of the pay scale, and defective women by exclusion from idealized gender roles. Whiteness has centered patriarchal authority and power in the hands of white men. And you can have the final word.
I think the law is indisputable with regard to those claims. But I think the most important point that I'd like to make and hope to end with is that I just hope you're wrong, Gus, that white people have to begin somewhere. And I believe that there are people. I believe I have witnessed. The one thing we have to be careful of is anybody claiming, you, me, anybody else claiming to know the version of events, the only perspective. Gus doesn't hold it. Jackie Battalora doesn't hold it. Tim Wise doesn't hold it. Nobody holds it. It's through a collection of perceptions that we start to get a better view of what's going on. And I certainly hope and have faith in, I believe in a sense of humanity that can be restored, and I believe that I am witnessing white people who are entering into a struggle that wasn't possible for my parents' generations, because they didn't. There was zero critique that they were introduced to in any formal way. that's for sure. And that in my generation, there is at least a critique that's more widely available through the works of, reading W.E.B. Du Bois in school, Peggy McIntosh, Tim Wise, and hopefully my book, Birth of a White Nation, contributes to those. And I believe that they are the seed, just like most of this history has shown, that you have to plant seeds, and it takes a long time to germinate, and hopefully they will be realized in that larger movement of white people away from white supremacy.
Right on. The book again, Birth of a White Nation, The Invention of White People and Its Relevance Today. Just came out not that long ago. You can check it out. Interesting material. Thank you for making a second visit to the program. Thoroughly enjoyed the dialogue. Appreciate you standing up to some criticism. I always appreciate when white people don't have a problem when non-white people, victims of racism, come at them with suspicion, as we should. Appreciate you sharing a bit of your Thursday evening with us, and we'll look forward to having further dialogue. I will keep track of your works, and I hope I'm wrong too. I hope there are some white people that are out there that are serious, and they're going to get cracking to solve this problem.
All the best to you, Gus. Thanks for your work.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Context of White Supremacy. We will take a quick commercial break and be back. If anyone had any thoughts, questions they wanted to get in about what they heard, we will make time for that as well. I don't think I will even include any sound clips. I'll make sure folks have time to get in their final say. And we will be back. Context of White Supremacy, quick commercial. Don't leave.
If you told black people that white people were committing biological genocides against us, and that by the year 2000, whatever, there would be no more black people, you would get one reaction. But you're saying that we're being threatened with cultural and psychological extinction. How do you get African people to see the urgency of the situation?
I don't know, frankly, if you can. I think that we have to focus on young people, young African people who have not been so conditioned with a way of thinking that supports European imperialism, European power, that they still have the ability to use their intuition, their spirituality, their Africanness to create, to think beyond the limitations that have been given to them in European academies. I think most of us as adults, as elders, have been so conditioned that we're afraid to move beyond the parameters that have been defined by our enemies in our thinking, so that our vision is limited. And so we are really not the people who should be conceptualizing the plans, the movements, what we should be building. But I focus on the younger people who hopefully are still more in touch with what is natural to African people. And if I can affirm that in them, they will see the urgency. I find that in my teaching. I find that in teaching young people, that once they are affirmed and introduced in a conscious way to the African worldview, it becomes crystal clear to them. And they see an urgency in us as African people building for self, as opposed to imitating forms which have been put in place to make sure that we continue to be oppressed.
Context of White Supremacy. Again, we'll be back. The book club tomorrow. The Warmth of Other Suns. Isabel Wilkerson, black female. 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, 4th installment. Should be constructive. Looking forward to it. I will hit the phone lines. The only thing that I will say briefly, I should have said this at the beginning of the program. This also fits a pattern that I have observed when you are a less confused victim of racism and you first encounter a white person who is willing to give up, accurate information to be truthful about the system of racism, white supremacy. It's been my experience that white people, they generally are very surprised to meet a non-white person that is slightly less confused. They generally don't bump into that many of them. So the first time, many of them, they're very caught off guard by that. By the second time you meet them, they have recovered. And the constructive information tends to go way down. It tends to be a lot more resistance. They are a lot more combative. You get a lot more buckets of words where they're not being clear. This is a pattern that I have observed consistently with speaking to white people. And all I can say is the first time that I met her at the White Privilege Conference, she admitted to being a racist. She gave up a lot of clear, accurate information, lots of it, tons of it. I listened to her workshop, then she came on the program. When I read her book, man, it was like night and day. It was just like, I cannot believe how ridiculous this information is. This is not constructive. I wouldn't even recommend that non-white people, even if you could get it for free, I wouldn't recommend reading this book. It was just, it was a dramatic drop-off from what she shared originally with regards to just being clear, accurate, to the point about what it means to be a white person in their long time. She talked about how white people make memorials to acts of terrorism against non-white people. When you have a group of people, if you want to think about the Redskins, the Texas Rangers, a whole myriad of images and concepts. The report I just mentioned about in Tennessee where they don't want to take down the poster or the picture of Robert E. Lee, that right there shows that white people have no interest in discontinuing the practice of white supremacy racism. I can only say I thought that was about how things were going to go, and I was prepared for it to be a contentious battle of a discussion. That was totally fine with me, and she did admit to being a racist, so she's doing what she's supposed to do to protect her white racist interests, in my view. I could be incorrect. We should have Shadow, Lashes, and the caller, I think that's our caller in Florida. Your 3 lines should be open.
Wow, Gus, I was just talking about that subject matter that you just got through talking about. I was just talking about it, I think, last night, within less than 24 hours ago. And you're being logical. It's that when a white person sees that you are not as confused as what they're used to being in contact with, then they're automatically going to withdraw from sharing information with you. That's just being logical, as far as I'm concerned. That your enemy is going to do that once they see that you're onto something, that the light is on with that victim, and they get defensive because they know ultimately they're on that team. And this team is, of course, the system of racist white supremacy, or white people. But I had to leave off of the program for something that was a matter of importance, or I would have wanted to ask her, because I believe she said she was mentioning about her resume, and she said something about she was in law enforcement. Is that correct?
Chicago Police, yes.
I didn't hear you. You broke up.
Chicago Police, yes, sir. Chicago Police.
Oh, okay, yeah. And my question would have been, could you tell me, have you ever mistreated and or harmed a non-white person? Did anybody ask her anything along those terms?
I didn't ask about her police experience, although that particularly being in Chicago, man.
I'm telling you, it's one of the places, I mean, everywhere where non-white people are in contact with white people, you're going to have problems. But it's especially in law enforcement. You know, I was just curious about that. But before I get off the line, in case she's also on the program, I just want to give a thanks to Pam because I received her books, received all of her books, and I'm having a good time reading her books, you know, from her and her other co-workers, as far as the books the series that she has available. I was curious about her with law enforcement and her experiences with non-white people and how she related to them. Other than that, I've been in contact with another non-white person that he and I exchanged views, and the last thing he was telling me that he was doing was he thinks his constructive agenda is his idea and mine is to convince white people that somehow that we are not different from them. If I'm able to be successful in convincing them whether or not I'm just like them, then that's his answer to solving the problem. And I just said, the only thing I can say to him was, well, good luck at what you're doing. And as far as that's concerned, but that's all I have to say right now.
Hi, this is Lashes. Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow, she was great. She just dropped that jewel for me. I was like, whoa, what? Repeat that again? When she explained that the concept of race as its use function now stems from the animal productivity of production, so to speak, as I can say it. And when she said that, I said, that makes sense, because I was able to correlate it with the term chattel slavery, which is used in historical accounts of the system of slavery in the United States. Also, I think of the term mulatto, how that was used to mean like being a donkey or a mule, like a breeding process of some kind, like an animal breeding process. That's what race was used. Well, race was used back in those not ancient, but 16th century. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And it also made me think, why does race or race and white supremacy constantly is always brought up in the 8th area of activity, which is sex? It completely makes sense now. And also, it even ties in well with Dr. Frances Cress Welsing theory as well. Even though I understood and grasped Dr. Frances Cress Welsing theory, but when she dropped that little jewel tonight, that really put everything into synchronicity for me. So I enjoy that. And I want to know, did the mention of race as an animal breeding ground production line, was it referenced in the book you were questioning her on tonight?
I do not recall that. I have the book here.
Thank you. That was amazing.
I
think she just dropped it like that. I was just, wow. Even though she was going through her buckets and buckets of words, I was still in sync in her linear thought pattern of where she was going. Then she dropped that little jewel within her buckets and buckets and buckets of words.
I don't remember that in the book. I'm going to say no. I'll look through again, but I'm going to say no, that's not in the book. I could be wrong, but I'm looking now.
That was one huge revelation out of her interview tonight. It really was. It makes total sense why sex is always brought up in regards to racism and white supremacy. Sex in terms of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing theory of, their numbers are dwindling and there's not enough of them being produced. It totally makes sense. The whole birth of dirt concept made by, different white males out there in higher levels of racism, white supremacy that dictate and create laws and stuff like that. It also ties in with the whole concept of what we call African Americans in the system of racism, white supremacy, black people, how they were even classified as 3/4 of a human being. It totally makes sense now.
Yeah, a lot of the terms that they use around that, I think, are like stock. I think that's one that they talk about. Poor stock, eugenics. They have a lot of those terms, I think, are pretty similar with regards to the way that they talk about racism, white supremacy, in the same way that they talk about breeding animals. Even that term gentrification, one of the listeners brought it up where they were saying the etymology going to gentry, noble white men. When they say gentrification, I think a lot of their terms pretty much go back to that same concept of breeding good bloodline or good stock, that sort of thinking, like you were saying with mulatto as well. Miscegenation, I think that's even one too.
Mm-hmm. Like even in Europe with the power echelons of white people, they have this whole term referring to the blue blood and the red blood. Mm-hmm. I guess that's where that comes from as well. But one thing that your guest made, she said that race is not biological, it's a social construct, which I understand. However, how race has been used, even before it was known to be applied to quote-unquote human beings, let's go back just to the animal breeding process, it was always tied into a biological sense and term, even though it is a social construct. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. With regards to individuals who classify themselves as white, that is not a quote-unquote biological category, but a primary consideration with regards to how white people are supposed to function and what this is all about. It does tie to biology with regards to what you're supposed to be doing in the bedroom, what you're not supposed to be doing in the red room, consequences both ways for all of that, and just control of people. There's a huge biological component to the way that white people think about themselves and the practice of racism, white supremacy. I'd say there seems to be a central biological component to the way that they think about themselves and the practice of racism, white supremacy.
Yes, I do agree.
I'm still looking through the book. I'm listening. I'm with you. I'm just looking through the book to make sure I didn't miss that. But I don't think that part is in the book about race and it being connected in any way with breeding or animals. I'm still looking.
But it totally makes sense when she put it out there. My brain just said, there's the correlation. Child slavery, 3/4 of human being, mulatto, the term miscegenation, as you brought up, the term gentrification, as you brought up, the term blue blood and red blood family stock in old colonial Europe, and how power is transferred from one line to the other in generations, even going on today with the whole queen and the king nonsense. It totally all makes sense. And even with the concept, I could be wrong, after all, I am a victim, the concept of white male, patriarchy, is even central and centered around sex. The practice of sex as power or domination, sex is like the core component in all of this. Kind of like the nucleus, along with their culture, and at the same time, it's just what kind of germ is this?
Isn't that your guy, Gunnar Myrdal? He has a great quote in his book, The Center, where he says the center of, I think he used the term segregation. I just switched it to white supremacy, but the center of segregation is about control of sex. I can even get the exact quote because I used it in my book review for since she was mentioned, racismws.com, but the interracial con game, she has, or I used it there. I'll go ahead and get it so I won't have to ramble. But he has a quote where he says that that's right at the center of it all. I was even thinking there's the birther movement, what they've been complaining about President Obama. That goes to it as well. And even them having that as the name of their group, the birther movement. I think it's right there again.
And back to her definition, your guest definition of the miscegenation law. If it was wrong in a crime for non-whites to marry white or white to marry a non-white, what we call non-white today, but it wasn't a crime for non-whites, what we call today, to marry each other, it just seemed like the only race that was really functioning was themselves, people who are now classified as white. You know what I mean?
Yep. She said she didn't understand that. I thought that was very clear, very logical. I was glad you brought that up. But yeah, that was the one where she said she didn't understand your question.
So it's like you're breaking the law by marrying a white person, but other non-whites are not breaking the law by marrying other non-whites, whether it's let's use something in today's term, a quote-unquote African-American and a quote-unquote Puerto Rican. They can marry each other, but that's not breaking the law. But if a white person marries a non-white person, the white person is breaking the law. And it was only exclusive to white men mainly to sow their oats and sewer other non-white people, even though the white female herself did the same thing. And even her, like that piece where you quoted in the book where the white woman was like, no, it wasn't in the book. You mentioned that you came into contact with another woman or interviewed a woman, something, a white female, and she said that, when a black man doesn't, pay attention to her, she doesn't feel like she's, her femininity is not defined or acknowledged. What kind of madness is that? It all centers, their whole identity is centered around sex, and their identity is centered around as well as anyone who is not white. Without non-whites, their identity means nothing. Without the control of sexual behavior of non-whites, their sexual escapades and free will, so to speak, means nothing.
That Murdaugh quote is, "Sex is the principle around which the whole structure of white supremacy is organized." Gunnar Murdaugh. I think he's accurate. And I had that on recording. We had a recording of that, and the racist that I'm referencing who said all that, that was recorded and got lost in the shuffle. It was a tragedy because that was another one. She, first time she revealed tons of information. She had read Mr. Fuller's book and she agreed that white people having sexual intercourse with non-white people is rape, shouldn't be done. She said that she was still at this time, even when she agreed with all this, she said she was still having sexual intercourse with black males and was going to continue to do so. She said she had tried to talk to her victim, sex partner, about racism, but they were not interested in doing so. And then she grew up here in Seattle. She said that for people who know the area, Garfield High School, mostly black high school, at least it was. But she said that at that time, black males did not find her to be sexually attractive. And she said that this negatively impacted her self-esteem and her sense of femininity and womanhood. But then when she went to college, University of Washington, when she went to college, that this switched and that they did, black males did see her as sexually attractive. And she felt like that was a growth in her power as a white woman racist, knowing that she had sexual control over black males. And she said on the same recording, she went to I think she said she went to or was going to some dance program in North Carolina with predominantly where there were going to be a significant number of black females. And she said she felt like she had that same control over black females, that if she wanted, she could have got at least some or one of them to participate in some anti-sexual behavior because she had that same power as a white woman. Lost records.
You probably already answered a question that I was thinking about earlier, Gus, but I'll bring it up anyway. With the advent of, did she ever admit to the idea that white people do not have any interest of solving the problem of racism, white supremacy?
She threw out a lot of buckets, and even she threw out the dichotomous thinking argument, which I hate. I've heard that quite a few times when you just ask a direct question, are you a racist? Oh my God, that dichotomous thinking and yes, no, and it's more complicated. And I even hear some victims, unfortunately, pick that up. And that's another one where I ask people, use your common sense. Any other time, if you have a wife or a female partner, are you pregnant? If she responded, oh my God, dichotomous thing. I can't believe you're asking me yes and no questions. Or, honey, are you having an affair? Oh my God, I can't believe you're asking me yes, no. I mean, use your common sense. At any rate, she said, generally, no. I don't see that. No. Generally, white people, they're not going to stop practicing racism, but there are small pockets of white people, so she says, that are, they're down for the cause and really trying to end this system.
But then at the same time, they'll come back around with this quote-unquote honesty. And you ask them, well, have you ever or do you have sex with non-white people? Which I see as a direct contradiction. In other words, what is constructive about having sex with a non-white person and you have no interest at all into solving the number one problem that affects them? I mean, it's you're talking about on evidence on how sex between white people and their victims actually warps the thinking process of the non-white victim. I mean, it doesn't get any more clearer to me than that. So I mean, I would probably be able to guess correctly that out of all of these white people who identify themselves as anti-racist, I think I heard some of them may have called themselves. I would imagine that a lot of them are either have or presently are having sex with non-white people, which is I mean, that right there alone is a huge conflict of interest.
Amen. I met her at the White Privilege Conference. Like I said, I didn't observe sexual intercourse going down, but the founder of that conference, Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., Soothing Lotion, is married to a white woman. He's had a child with 2 different white women. I just feel like that sort of environment just that right there is enough. Just that right there sends out a clear signal. But I feel like that sort of environment, it would be easy because you're there and, oh my gosh, Jackie Battalora and somebody like J. Love Calderon, she's been on the program before, and she's married to a non-white male. But it would just be easy. These white people are down and they're cool and you're all staying in the same hotel for a week. And going to the bar. When I was there, they were encouraging folks, let's go out and have drinks and go out and kick it at night together. It would all come together nicely, I think. And I would just go back to the story that I began with. When I met her, when all of this concluded and great information, let's do the program, she asked for the hug. I declined, and that being reported as a problem where I'm being chastised by Dr. Moore, cowbell, 20 minutes later. And since non-Mighty Wick was present, there were only 4 people in the room when this happened, when she requested the hug, and I declined. 2 white females and 2 victims. Non-Mighty Wick was with me for the entire time until I saw Dr. Moore, so it was either Jacqueline Battalora herself who went and ratted me out to Dr. Moore for not giving her a hug, or this other white woman. Or it could have been both, I suppose.
I remember it being talked about, and I think you had some audio visual of the trip also in the process. I remember that white people are very contradictory in that light, and I'm sure they are very much aware of it and how they affect the mentality. The mental health of non-white people when they having sex with them or involved with sexual relations with them. How the damage that they do. And I guess when she was coming on you, when she saw you not wanting to be involved in it in a way, she accepted that as a form of resistance from a political sense, from the standpoint whereas, okay, this guy, he is not the usual non-white black male that I'm used to being around. Rejection, in other words, is what she got out of it. Sometimes I've been in that type of environment, and it can be very dangerous. Also, when a white female is rejected.
Amen. Lashes, give me 1 second because 2 other people dialed in. I want to make sure they get a comment. 8562 and 9769. Did y'all have anything?
Yeah. Good evening. Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was hearing Lashes speak about using sex to control non-white people. That's what she was saying. Am I correct or no? Lashes?
No, that's not correct. I was bringing up how sex is the core of racism, white supremacy, aka white culture, and how the guest was talking about the term, what we call race today, was practiced in terms, and it meant in terms of animal breeding ground. So when the guest mentioned that it was stated in the law back in the 16th century, that was the case, it made me think of the correlation between the term chattel slavery and why African Americans were classified as 3/4 of a human being, because to them we were not humans.
Not human, okay.
And the term mulatto, which was often referenced to a person being half mule and half donkey, and why, for example, in this culture, there's such a love and passion for animals and having a pure breed dog, or to describing a mutt dog, or this is a half beagle, half this kind of a dog or animal, what have you. And how currently, still today in Europe, there's the term of the blue bloods and the red blood family in terms of lineage and royalty and who has power. Is it the blue blood or the red blood in regards to whites in Europe maintaining power and passing on their power to the next generation. So when she put that out there, it just synced up everything as far as Dr. Francis Cress Welsing theory, in terms of, genetic annihilation is fearful. It all centers around sex. And how sex, the practice of sex, and the domination of sex, or power using sex, is defines what we called, or what they call themselves, white male and white female, and how they operate within their cultural paradigm, white culture, which is racism, white supremacy.
Okay, yeah. I was listening to what you were saying, and I'm reading a book called Medical Apartheid. Mm-hmm. And in the book, they're talking about how they use slaves, they use basically like animals. They just just experiment on them, and they didn't give consent and anything like that. And yes, and how white people always say that black people are hypersexual, and I think in reality it's actually white people who are hypersexual.
Correct. Look at our society today. Everywhere we go, TV, newspaper, selling clothes, selling any kind of commodity. Sex is the core of selling. Sex is the core core of doing trading, buying, and selling of goods.
Yep. And I think you made an excellent point. And I made a connection with that book I was reading, and that's what I wanted to say.
The business of pornography is a $1 billion global business that's controlled by white people.
9769, did you have something you wanted to get in?
Hello?
Your voice is very low. Can you speak up?
Hello, can you hear me?
Is it, I don't know, is that just... Go again.
Hello?
I can hear you, it's just you sound very low. If you can speak up, I don't know if it's a poor connection. I can hear you, it's just your voice is very low.
All right, I'll try my best.
Oh, okay, I can hear you. That's better.
Okay. Earlier in the broadcast, you mentioned that it was dangerous for black men to have a relationship with white women. Can you please elaborate on that?
Are you a new listener?
Yes, I am, actually.
Okay. Ooh, let's see. Do you believe we're in a system of racism, white supremacy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a suspicion of white people that they could be racist?
Sometimes. Yeah.
Sometimes. Okay. One I think is a huge problem with regards to racism, white supremacy, and why we non-white people, black people, have not been able to solve this problem is that we do not understand what it means to be white. If one thing, in fact, I would say today is not even a good broadcast. If you go back and you listen to the first time she was on the program, I think she did a much better job of explaining why it is that to be white means to be racist. She said it today, but she didn't do a good job. She did a much clearer job without all the unnecessary words and verbiage. And that's something that you need to think on, because I could be wrong. I don't try to convince people of that. I just say that's something to think on, and you can just take it as a question. What does it mean to be white? What I've concluded, and have you had sex with a white person?
No, I have not.
Okay, that's good. That's good. What I've concluded is that, particularly with white women, that is a huge, and that was a huge part of the dialogue today. I don't think non-white people think of white women as being racist. That is a huge error. It is a gigantic error. I think that sexual intercourse with white people, period, is one of the worst things that can happen. Just to be brief about it, if we're in agreement that there is a system of racism, white supremacy, white people have more power than non-white people. There's a huge power differential between the two of us. That said, we can just look at basic laws for how people are supposed to behave when there is a clear difference in power. If we're talking about on a job between an employer and an employee, if we're talking about in prisons, the prison guards and the inmates, even if we're talking about at school with teachers and students, even at the collegiate level, in all of those situations, they have rules that prohibit and restrict sexual intercourse between those who have more power, be it the employer, the warden, or the professor. They're not supposed to be having sexual intercourse with the people that they are in charge of, the inmates, the students, the employees. The same should apply within the system of white supremacy. The more powerful white people, they should not be taking advantage of and exploiting individuals that are subject to them. You should not be, particularly if they say they're about the business of ending this system. But that should not be going on. The second part of it is, under this system, all non-white people should have a huge amount of suspicion for any white person. You really, in my view, you should be thinking white equals racist, white equals racist, white equals racist. That being said, do you think it makes logical sense for a non-white person, a victim of racism, to have sexual intercourse with a racist?
Well, I mean, now that you've breaking it down the way you just did, it certainly makes sense for it not to go down that way. But I appreciate you for breaking it down that way.
For sure. There are books on the subject. Pam, I think one already was mentioned. Pam, she's been on the program many times. If you go back in the archives, you can. We talked about her book, and we talked about this subject a lot. You can get the book. You can visit her website, racismws.com. It's titled "The Interracial Con Game." I wrote a review. You can read the review, or you can listen to the program to see if it will make more sense. One of the other huge reasons I have concluded that having sexual intercourse with a white person, it has a huge detriment with regards to that non-white person's ability to be honest about racism, white supremacy, and to logically think about white people. It has a huge impairment. I would even cite Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., the founder at the White Privilege Conference. He's been a guest on the program. We talked about this with him as well. He's married to a white woman. I feel like it totally destroys your ability to be honest about things because you got, as Pam says all the time, you cannot go to bed with a white person and then get up and fight racism, white supremacy. He will say in one breath, he has a theory. It's called the theory of incapability. And I'm not gossiping. We talked about that. All this stuff is in archives. I'm not, trying to talk bad about him. He's a victim, but this is a matter of record. He said that he has a theory of incapability, meaning that white people cannot see black people as anything but niggers. And he explains this on the program, but he's still married to a white woman. And I think I asked him on the program, well, does your wife, who's white and admitted to being a racist, does she see you as a nigger? And he said yes. And I would just, pause right there. Does that sound like a healthy relationship where a black person is married to someone who thinks of them as a nigger?
No. Not at all.
Not gossiping. He's a victim. I'm not even talking bad. Again, this is a matter of record. You can go back and listen. 2009 was his first visit. He came back again in 2010 after I visited the conference. And, it's a matter of record. You can just check it out. As I said, Pam's book, great. You can listen to the program. It's one to think on. But I think white people know that this causes a lot of confusion for non-white people. If we can get them in the bed, they will be ruined. They won't think of us as victims. They'll sympathize with us. I'm sorry. Were you going to say something?
Oh, well, no, I definitely see what you're saying. So if we, if whites and non-whites can have constructive dialogue in these kinds of relationships, then what sort of, progress can be made as far as combating the system of white supremacy, as far as making progress?
I didn't hear the first part of the question. What did you say?
If whites and non-whites can have these kinds of discussions or dialogues where we can address the relationship issues as far as the power that's being exchanged, as far as, entering these relationships, what progress can be made for combating white supremacy?
I generally don't get into conversations with white people at this point about having sexual. I will ask if they are having sexual intercourse with a white person, but I generally don't get into debates with them at this point about whether or not that should happen. And in my view, it's an act of racism, white supremacy. It is a maximum act of racist aggression anytime a white person is doing this behavior, encouraging this sort of behavior, misbehavior. I generally just try to keep it focused on getting constructive information and a better understanding of what it means to be a white person and the system of racism, white supremacy on the whole. It's been my experience, white people, they get very angry, very hostile at any suggestion that they stay out of bed with non-white people. Many of the white people that I've talked to, those have been some of the most hostile responses that I've got from white people. I had a white woman who burst into tears. We were having this discussion. I had a white man who was my white friend at the time. He was my white friend, and he was married to a white woman. So I felt he should have no emotional investment in this at all because, he's off the market and he's with a white woman. He got furious. He began cursing and didn't even want to shake my hand when we left. I was flabbergasted. Like, what? I don't understand. Why is this such an emotional attachment for you? It seems like you don't have a dog in this race, but apparently he did as a white man. And that's just what I've concluded based on their reactions, that this is very important that white people be able to maintain sexual access to their victims whenever they want it. They know that it benefits their system. If offspring are produced, they're going to be able to have another confused generation of offspring who can help maintain the system, and they can totally destroy that victim, the person that they've got in bed. They can totally destroy their will and ability to fight against racism, white supremacy, because now the enemy is right there. And what I've heard generally is that if they stay together, if there's a marriage or a long-term partnership and children, generally that right there will be enough to extinguish any dialogue on racism. Generally, the white person, from what I've seen, whether it's a white woman or a white man, they generally put their foot down and say, hey, we are not going to have a whole lot of chatting about racism. And that's that. And that's generally what happens.
I see. Well, Thank you, for definitely answering my questions. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Right on. Did we miss Shadow? Did you have anything you wanted to get in? Did you have anything? Line is open. Did you have any comments, or are you just hanging out to listen? All right, I'll assume he's good. Pam, the address for her website again is racismws.com, Interracial Con Game, and other books, but that was referenced specifically. Anyone who wants to get more information, you can also dig in the archives. And here we talked about that book specifically, and she gave her view on why that shouldn't happen. It's one of the worst things ever. I would also say go back and listen to that program with Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. the first time around. It was May 2009. Just to get more information about the whole environment at the White Privilege Conference. And then the last, 15 minutes of well, not the last 15 minutes, but the last 15 minutes before we went to the phone line, we talked specifically about the sexual intercourse piece, and just hearing how he responded to that. Fascinating. He's a victim of racism, but just hearing how he responded to that whole conversation about we need to stay out of bed with white people until racism has been solved. Very revealing. Soothing lotion. Infamous. Soothing lotion. We did overtime today. Anybody have a last sentence before we wrap up?
No, thank you.
Yeah, I have something to say. I was just thinking, if white people think of non-white people as animals or like childlike, then why would they want to have sexual intercourse with them? And if they do want to do that, and they do want to do that, what kind of people are they? Like that's what I was thinking. That's my thoughts.
Psychopaths.
You're here.
Okay.
Jerry Sandusky, I say that's the way you should think about it. It's Jerry Sandusky. Every time out. That's anytime. I wouldn't care if it's the black person or the non-white person is 60 years old and the white person is, 50, whatever the case. It's Jerry Sandusky every time. It's total perversion and pedophilia. As you said, they call us animals and monkeys and apes and all this other stuff. Why would you want to be in bed with someone that you consider less than human? It's total pathology in every way, shape, and form. And I think they even view it as that. I think Mr. Fuller, that's why he has it in the word guide, that they call it kinky sex. If you want to know, we were just talking about it with Renethia Tate for the listener.
Right.
She said the same thing. She said the exact same thing on her program, that's, hey, I can go experiment. I can go hop in with these niggers and we can do all kinds of things. I can stick things up their rectum and get down and do all kinds of freakish and perverted things. That's the way that they view us, and that's the way that they view that sex act, and all of those perversions that goes into the damage that it does to the non-white person's mind. Sex is huge. I think we really undervalue that when Dr. Welsing talks about this is the act that is responsible for us being here. This is how people are produced, and white people's disdain and perversion and pathologies in the bedroom speak volume to what they think about life on the whole, the creator, and us, and them to some degree.
I wonder too, how white people can look at non-white people as not human, but I don't think non-white people see white people as not human.
We see them as angels.
I think it's difficult.
We see them as angels.
Yes, and I don't see why it's so hard when they've done so many things and still do so many things. How it's so hard for non-white people to see that these people are monsters and demons.
That's what domination looks like. The person that called from a block number, do you have something quick you wanted to get in before we wrap up? Block number?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, how do you feel about black people being in sexual relationships with other non-white people who are not black, like Asians or Latinos or, people like that?
What a question to end on. That has come up a couple times before. What I have said is that I frequently believe that many times black people that are in these arrangements with sexual arrangements with a non-black, non-white person, I think a lot of times that is a response to racism, white supremacy. We have been, as Dr. Umar said yesterday, we've been so conditioned to hate anything black, including ourselves, just anything. If I can get as far away from black, even if I can't get a white person, if I can get a non-black, non-white person, I do think that there's a lot of that. However, I do not speak against or discourage that just because I've seen that it is so difficult just to get the no sex with white people thing down. That is more than I can chew. Plus there are, it's just more than I can deal with. Like I totally see the racism and how it operates in some of those arrangements with regards to just the conditioning, but it's like, hey, how much can you deal with? We could add that, or I could add that to the list of things, but it's like, gee whiz, there's enough. I have enough trouble just with the no sex with white people thing that to add that as well, at this point, I'm willing to concede, hey, as long as it's not a white person, fine.
Well, to me, I think black people should just stay with black people, but that's just my opinion, and that's all I want to say.
I totally respect that. Totally respect that.
Yeah.
Right on.
That's all.
Right on. Glad you got your question in. We'll be back tomorrow. The Warmth of Other Suns. 4th installment. Isabel Wilkerson, black female. Thoroughly enjoying the book so far, even though we're very early in it. Don't even think we're right at the quarter mark, so haven't even covered that much of it yet. But tune in tomorrow, same program time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Looking forward. We'll be back every day for the remainder of the week. Hope it was of some constructive value for folks listening in. If you like the program, so what? If you don't like the program, so what? We will be back. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Anybody want to do the prayer to wrap things up? Right on. Make sure that we do not forget our ancestors, our family. They too have suffered, struggled against racist man, racist woman, racist child. Draw on their energy, their strength, their resilience as we persevere to totally, permanently end the reign of white terrorism and institute a global, universal system of justice. Make sure we all keep in mind our goal: universal man, universal woman, high expectations for what we can become once we permanently neutralize white people, racist, white supremacists. It has been time. Context of White Supremacy signing out. Thank you all for tuning in.
I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.